Wow, I was not expecting that, but that was an epic intro right there. Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. We are here to give our spoiler-filled review on Dune, which is the big to-do in the cinemas right now. This is Dune Part 1 of what we hope will be a Part 2, fingers crossed. Of course, directed by Denis Villeneuve. It's the epic science fiction film based on the prolific 1965 novel by Frank Herbert. This is a very, very exceptionally well-respected property, which, I mean, you've already done spoiler-free review on it. I haven't given my thoughts on it yet, so you're getting my first time on this, and hopefully you guys go easy on me. But this is, with a film of this scale, you know, of a novel of this scope, which was for ages considered to be the unfilmable novel. You know, we're getting two parts of it now out of a very rushed 1980s film, which I have seen now, which I might throw some comparisons to. It's a very difficult review to get into, especially with spoilers, because it's so vast. It's massive, isn't it, in scale? But we have a plan. We're going to try and get through it as effectively as we can. And of course, if you've seen Dune, if you've read the books, anything like that, please do message us, you know, comment as we go through. But before we dive into this absolute mammoth of a film, over to George with the socials.
Absolutely, guys. So do comment along if you've seen this film. I want to ask one thing. If you've read the book, I'm going to go out on a whim, say for people at home that may have not read the book and only seen this film or part one, please don't post any spoilers after where this film finishes. Obviously, you can mention like characters or casting if you want, but certain events don't put just on the off chance other people may not have. But free reign on the first half. If you have read the book, obviously let us know. Comment your thoughts on the book and that usual stuff. But hit the like button, hit subscribe. There's a lot of stuff coming out. We've had an insane week of videos. There's been a lot of new releases. Venom, Halloween Kills, The Last Duel, and Dune as well on top of it. So, and it's all going to go quiet for a couple of weeks because there's a Marvel film coming soon, which is when they all get quiet and scared of releasing stuff. So, do comment along tonight. And as always, if you are new to the channel, if you know what we do, hit us up on social media. That is Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinema-savvy, and there's. But no, as this is the spoiler discussion on Dune, and I think it's safe to say, I know there is a spoiler-free review which we did. It was a couple of weeks ago, so I don't know if I've said this before, but I think it's fair to say that this is one of the most anticipated films of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to actually jump in with something I was thinking about a lot today. We use the term event film a lot on the channel. And then there's another category thing with this one, which is like, and you know, you'll describe film as an epic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this grand scale. And I was having this really like inner thoughts debate when I was driving to the cinema this morning. And I was like, is this film an epic or isn't it an event? Now, I think this is an epic. And I know we've never had this discussion.
Yeah.
But I was like, I want to keep, like, I would say Lord of the Rings is an epic. Like, it is this mammoth gargantuan task that normal people, I'm not saying normal people, I'm saying like some of the best directors couldn't do.
Yeah.
Whereas I would say, you know, and I'm going to be biased, stuff like The Tenet, The Dark Knight, they are event films. I would say Infinity War and Endgame are event films, but an actual epic is such an understatement. And I think that's more the traditional old school cinema. And I just wanted to say that really randomly. It's not in the schedule, but I just wanted to like try and say that to someone today because it was just clustering. And I've seen so many people online talking about seeing this, what they've witnessed, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, this is to me, I think, a bit more than an event film because an event film has the entire world saying, we're going in. And I don't think Dune's going to have that. Thanks, HBO Max. And other reasons. But I don't know. Is that weird? And we've never discussed epic and event films, but I feel like this is the right time as well.
No, I mean, absolutely. And, you know, if we do get a part 2 to this thing, you are going to have a very neat 5-hour adaptation on which is a massive book. And I did attempt to listen to the audiobook before going into this thing. George, absolute trooper, you managed to get it done, or I think you got roughly to where this first film ended when you were reading the book at the time you first saw this thing. You've since read the book complete now, and you're moving on to book part 2. I started it. I got about 10 chapters in or so, and you know, I've read The Lord of the Rings. I've read The Silmarillion. Dune was almost impenetrable for me. There were words, there were names, there were planet names, there was all kinds of stuff, and it was very overwhelming to me as a first read. I even went back to the beginning and thought, you know, I'm completely lost 10 chapters in. Let's go back and let's try it again. in the end, I kind of abandoned it. I probably will come back to it now that, you know, I've seen part one. I kind of know the lay of the land, a little bit of the lore. I expect there's a hell of a lot more in the book than there is even in this film. Yes, I agree. I agree. It was very tough to get into, but you know, I've seen the original film now, so I think that the book will be a lot more accessible for me now that I have actors and kind of places and faces that I've seen visually represented in the films. I think that will make the, you know, the event of reading the book a lot more. But again, very well respected book. As I mentioned, for a lot of people, it's been considered unfilmable. And maybe if you have seen the 1984 film, you would still kind of agree that it's unfilmable. But that's a whole different review for another time. I think this is right off the bat. I don't know if there's been like an insane amount of hype amongst many sort of like casual film goers. I think it's done very well so far, given the circumstances. I mean, HBO Max is a whole different kettle of fish, and obviously COVID is still a thing, and that's going to have a knock-on effect as well. And also, it's a very packed movie week, really, with a lot of other competing releases at the time. But I do think, as a property, this isn't a very acquired taste. I think Dune has its fans. Its fans are exceptionally vocal, which is great. But it's going to be very interesting to see how this goes over with general audiences, because that's the audience I think that this has got to win over if we are going to see, you know, huge returns from this film, which is what Warner Brothers are looking for before they greenlight part two. Part two is probably going to happen anyway, I would imagine, because could you imagine living in a world where we get this and we don't get a follow-up? I think that might be the biggest case of cinematic blue balls that's ever happened. But yeah, it's an interesting one because it is such a unique concept. I don't think I've seen, I was going to say I don't think I've ever seen anything like this, but once you see this and you realize that it came out in 65, you can see a hell of a lot of similarities and inspiration, or things that are directly clipped whole cloth from Dune. So I always love seeing something that kind of started it all, really, that you then see, you know, Star Wars being a big one, Harry Potter, any hero's journey film, you know, lifted directly from this.
No, absolutely. Yanis has put comment for the part two. I think part two is a good way to kickstart this, actually, because, you know, if you watched it, you've probably seen the film by now. I think it's happening. I know one of the Warner Brothers high ups said midweek that, you know, the title says part one, so you can assume there's a part two. And I think as the weeks have gone by, I think it's worth talking about the marketing campaign, that obviously this was meant to be out last December. No film was originally going to release in December near it. It was going to have free fall. And I think you're right, Chris. This is a hard sell to the general audience, which I'm fine with. There's obviously, you know, over here in the UK, obviously Bond, I think, has just cracked the top 10 grossing UK films ever. And it's been on every single trailer for that. It's been on Shang-Chi. So the trailers have been out there. But I've only really seen that it ramp up properly in the last sort of 2-3 weeks outside of the film circle. And I think this is a really big thing now, is that amongst the film fans, take Dune fans aside from it, yes, there'll be fans that like Dune and like films. Having Denis Villeneuve's name on this is gargantuan. But he's a director that the general public aren't familiar with, in absolute truth. The one they may have seen is Blade Runner. They massacred the box office for that because they marketed it as this inglorious sci-fi thing. They didn't go for the things that that was in the film that the audience would want to see. They very much marketed it as a Blade Runner film more so than a film. And I feel the marketing for this film has gone for the big, loud explosions, action bits, comedy bits as well, which I'll get into some characters. And this had a completely 180 approach to Blade Runner, which was very interesting. I just wanted to bring that because I'm going to be really honest, I was surprised to see a full IMAX today. Not as full as Bond, when you know that you don't have to book. You can book next to someone, but people are still leaving a gap seat. I hope that continues. I don't want to sit next to people. But with Bond, there was no spare seat in the house. I don't think we'll get that maybe until Spider-Man, in truth. But I was very surprised at getting it full today. And I think I've seen someone 3 times now. The press screening, you were at the Odeon screening on Monday. I was at the Cineworld equivalent. Probably only about 2/3 full. And I know a couple of people that declined to go because they were holding out for the IMAX opening weekend. A few of my friends said they didn't want to go to it early, which was very interesting that it's had a big IMAX discussion, which people might not talk about as well. But the opening box office is going to be awful in America because of HBO Max. I think they've announced it's opened with 15 mil on Friday. So they're looking at a 40 mil opening weekend. I think it's very similar numbers to Suicide Squad, which was also HBO Max same day release. So it's performed very, very strong in the countries that haven't had other films out, that haven't had it online, but it's going to struggle in America. And I know that Warner Brothers said last month they are taking into account the amount of people streaming it. And I'm just going to put an asterisk on there. I'm sure they'll be looking into who's also torrenting it, because like Black Widow, which they went on to say was one of the most pirated films in history, how many big blockbusters are available to pirate on release day in pristine 4K? Not many. So I think it's worth mentioning that stuff. I do think we're going to get part two. I think there's no way they're going to leave this now. But it is I'm going to be very interested over the next few weeks to see how people react to it that aren't necessarily film or Dune fans, if they go and check it out.
Yeah, I think it's a very slow burn film, isn't it? And I think that's great, especially after seeing the 1984 one. I'm going to try and not compare it too much because I think it's unfair to. It's completely different scenarios and everything, completely different time of filmmaking, but that was a film that felt like it was a film on speed run. And there's so much, there's even more world building in that, elements that they haven't bought into these up-to-date films essentially just yet, that so much was crammed into like a 2-hour 15 package with that one, and you couldn't keep up with it. So I think that the slower pace with this one, splitting it into 2 parts, is absolutely the right way to go. I don't think you could condense this down into a 3-hour film, maybe not even a 4-hour film, with everything that transpires in this. So I like that it's a slow burn, but maybe that could turn people off. If they've looked at the trailers, if they think they're getting like a big, loud action movie. Don't get me wrong, there is action in this film, but it feels very small scale. And I think probably the big action set pieces that people might have expected from this one would be coming in a part 2 once we get to that final act of the story, essentially. And I've seen a lot of reviews of this as well, saying that it's very difficult to talk about this film because it's part 1. And I can kind of see that, but it's like, also, you knew what you were signing up for. You know that this is an adaptation in 2 halves telling one book, which is exactly the way to do it, because you don't want one and done film of Dune to come out and it be 3 hours and then everyone complains that they've cut so much out. It annoys the book fans. People are going to, say that the pacing's awful and everything like that. So it's absolutely the right idea to split it up. But I do wonder if that's going to have a knock-on effect with people. When it hit credits, everyone in the cinema, my cinema was packed when I went to see it. It was actually very difficult for me even to get a ticket to go and see that film. It was very down to the wire. It was completely packed house for it. They were clearly all film fans or Villeneuve fans or Dune fans. So they knew that so when it ended, everyone was happy. Maybe some people even knew where it was going to go into a part 2. But again, the casual fans would have probably been like 8-year-old me seeing Fellowship of the Ring for the first time and seeing the film end with Frodo and Sam walking down a cliff going, well, they haven't destroyed the ring. What's happened? You haven't ended the story, not knowing. And I mean, we are kind of in this limbo state at the moment. The difference is with those films and a lot of part 2s, they are filmed as a complete full movie and then just released across 2 films. This is a very different scenario where they filmed a part 1 and they still have yet to film that part 2, which is a little bit strange, especially with modern filmmaking when it comes to, splitting these final acts of books or whatever it happens to be into 2 or even 3 parts.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And I think what I've been doing, not reading recently, is that Denis Villeneuve's approach to it, that obviously I hadn't read the book. I'm not going to say details of it, but he said that when it was offered, he could have done them back to back, but he wanted the gap in between.
Right.
And I think I kind of respect that. And after reading the book, I'm actually quite intrigued to see what he means by that as well. So I'm quite optimistic about it. I think they mentioned they've got filming dates locked in already. Because I was going to say, we'll get into the cast shortly, but that is a hell of an amount of A-listers in that film. In-demand actors is probably a better term than A-listers as well. But everyone in this film to keep dates on standby. This was a film that was shot on location. It was in the deserts. I think a lot of it was actually shot in Hungary and Europe as well. So I think this is a film where they're all committed. I believe that the cast all signed 2 picture deals, but they can all get a renegotiation bracket salary between part 1 and part 2. Because let's be honest, the price of getting Timothee Chalamet, 3 years ago versus now is going to be very different. I'm not saying he's holding out for money, but I'm saying that his status as an actor in the last 3 years is absolutely ballooned since he has been announced this film. So it's really interesting. And obviously, I think what's made the whole conversation worse is obviously the HBO Max stuff. How Warner Brothers screwed over every filmmaker, actor, anyone involved last year. They destroyed them all. And I think that after Denny's done with it, I'm curious because we know that Nolan's left them, and Denis Villeneuve has been the one director that's still there. Like, yeah, I hate them. Like, go watch it at the cinema, please. Don't watch it online. Like, he's marketing his own film by saying don't watch it in one of the two places, and I have nothing but respect for him because, well, so I've seen this. You know, first we was at the Cineworld in Leicester Square, and obviously it's massive. So there's a lot to take in. It's just massive, and I really enjoyed Monday at the normal screening because obviously, you know, don't have to like look to the sides to get to certain corners and stuff. So it was really interesting with that. And then today going back to the IMAX, but obviously the local one where I am, it was just the scope was just incredible. And normally, I know I sort of harp on the. I don't know if I said this in the spoiler free, but you know, I always go to watch the films IMAX. I don't mind that. I like my blockbusters big and stuff like that. But there are very few films that like utilize the format to its absolute maximum, and that is both sound and image. And what I will say with this, that it wasn't just the case that, oh yeah, we can just extend it by a couple of centimeters here and there when you're at home. This IMAX camera usage was the cinematography is being shot around the fact that it's almost a square frame. That's one way of looking at it. And it was really interesting to see it again on Monday and then again today because you did take in so much more. And I think that's more of a compliment to the cinematography, but it's also by design. And I think in the elite tier of IMAX films, I've always had, obviously, I'm not going to say every Nolan one, but as a standout, Tenet utilized the format incredibly. That knew it was taken into account extra space. I'd say both Avengers films failed. They just did the whole, we're getting a bigger image. They didn't actually use that into account. And I think Dune is up there with Nolan's use of IMAX. Tron Legacy I'd add into that mix as well, actually. Their directors that came on board knew what they wanted to do, how to use the format and build a film around it. And I think that's a really important thing for the experiences that I mean, I will watch this at home in a couple of months when it's out.
It ain't going to be the same.
It ain't going to be the same. And that's it. And I'm already prepping myself for a double bill whenever part 2 does want to come out. But just the again, the scope, the cinematography, having all. I don't even know how I've got into this IMAX discussion, by the way, but this was for me massive. Like, I'm not sitting here that, you know, don't watch this. Just I'm asking people to go to the cinema because they can watch it at home. Whereas normally if it was cinema, I'd be like, go to the IMAX. But if you do get a chance, obviously do go to the IMAX because we'll get to sound later. But that is in its own level or playing field. Really quickly, Chris.
Oh yeah,
Yanis says a 4-hour director to cut anyone.
I'm down.
I'm down if it means this is pre-part 2. So if he's got more footage of people just going about their day business, I'll take it. But I don't think we will get anything at all. I don't know how Lord of the Rings did it. I don't want to do the comparison, but it's going to happen, isn't it? But did the extended cuts come after the trilogy came out or in between each one?
Yeah, it was kind of right before the new film was to be released. So you had 2001 December, it was released in cinemas, and then I think you got the other one around the summer or late autumn of 2002. And then obviously the new one came out. And then as soon as that happened, you knew you could expect the next one the following year. I actually think that's really relevant to talk about, actually, just in terms of the scope of this thing, because I don't know if we want to sort of open with like a biggest positive and a biggest negative of this film and then sort of go into the characters and everything like that. But I was bowled over and continue to be, and I continue to think about it, how amazing this film looked. Without a shadow of the doubt, it's the best looking film I've seen all year. Every now and then you get a film that comes along, and it's usually within the fantasy genre for me, but one that's just so conceptually astounding. And, you know, I always say it's one of those films where if you bought like the companion book or like The Art of Dune or whatever, I had the same with Mad Max Fury Road. I guess, you know, it helps if it's also set in a desert somehow. Maybe that's to do with it. But every frame, every shot, costumes, set design, it's one of the best sort of like realized worlds that I've seen in a long time. I think it's absolutely outstanding. The gorgeous vistas of the desert, the city, even to the point where I'm looking at things and I'm like, this is probably all CGI, but some of it looks like model work as well, where you get a really good sense of geography in the film where, you know, they're just kind of spouting exposition, but it's a film where you need exposition. You need to understand the rules of this world and the politics of this world because it's so, you know, it's so dense with like loads of different factions and everything. And they'll just be flying. It's almost like a tour guide. You know, they're just flying over the city and we're taking it in as the characters are. It's absolutely astounding to watch. And I mean, I haven't seen it on IMAX yet. I would love to get the chance to see this on IMAX. Maybe when part 2 comes out, if they do a 2-parter, I'm absolutely there for it. see this on the biggest, loudest cinema that you can. Because yeah, I can imagine, watching this on a smaller screen ain't going to have the impact. And, if you do have HBO Max and you think, well, I could go and see it in the cinemas, but I've got it at home on HBO Max, please go and see this in the cinema. Because honestly, you're not going to have anywhere near the impact you would on a big screen. And Denis Villeneuve as well. Like recently you saw Arrival as well. And again, the sense of scale in that film, of that alien ship, and it's a very simple concept in that film, probably a lot simpler than Dune, but I'd say he and Gareth Edwards have the best sense of scale out of any sort of directors working in the business, like it or not. But, like his 2014 Godzilla film, when that trailer came out, when Godzilla is on screen and you have that size comparison, it's terrifying. And then, Rogue One as well, the shots of the Death Star looming over the desert and everything. It's the best sense of scale I've seen in a film. And funnily enough, I checked. Yeah, Greg Fraser also did the cinematography to Rogue One, so that makes a lot more sense now.
And he's doing Batman next year, which has a very, very nice. We've only seen trailers, but he's a very. I think scale. What he said is a really, really good thing, and it's talking about Arrival. I watched that Charlie's in the comments a few weeks ago, and it was the fact that it was just like this ship lodged on Earth, and it looked like it should be there. It didn't look like here's a CGI ship. Here's just a. In these shooting films at uni, it's like, let me just play around with the background. Like, haha, I've made like a name if I can go in a shit short film. It's that sort of thing you do at school. Whereas this is like, no, that ship just naturally came in. And this is what I kind of clocked with during the scope of it, that it feels like, and I've actually seen there a documentary used in interviews, and I've not read it, so apologies, but it feels very documentary. Like you're just following this family around for a couple of hours. And I really enjoyed it because, as you said earlier, it's a slow burner. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think what the difference is that we normally don't get these as $200 million films, and without sort of slagging off the state of current cinema. We definitely haven't had this in the last 10 years. Even, my favorite director, you mentioned Mad Max as well. They're all 100 miles an hour, uber paced. Even the latest Bond film was very, very quick paced, and that was a long film. But we've not had that sort of slow burn blockbuster, and it's really interesting to get that with this, that there is sometimes 30 seconds to a minute lost, and it's just them showing a ship getting picked up and taken away, and they're like, I want to see more. Like, I just want to live, not I want to live there, but you want to be there, and that's credit to the director and the world is able to create. And also with Arrival, I think he said that he'd first been told about Dune in 2016, so all I know is that Legendary Pictures acquired the rights. Obviously worked with Warner Brothers a lot, but they fundamentally have the rights, and then made a deal with Warner Brothers. And what it is that he said, I want to do Arrival and Blade Runner first. So I've got some craft. I've done big films. I've done sci-fi, and then I would be willing to take on Dune. And I'm just sat there thinking, like, this is a guy that obviously has so much respect for the source material. He doesn't want to rush it. How many directors would get offered a film and be like, I'm doing it because I need to do it, and I'm just going to drop what I've done or not be ready to take on a property? And I think also the fact that he used like Blade Runner as a test plot for Dune, that's like big to say that for me. And I loved Blade Runner 2049, but I think I don't want to say all of this film's success is Denis Villeneuve. It's not absolutely, because obviously it's in the source material, but I can't picture this film, and I'm going to trick Nolan again, my favorite director in the world. I was thinking I couldn't see Nolan doing a film like this, as much as I love him. And I think Denis Villeneuve is probably the best working director to say pre-Dune. The fact he was dropping these films annually, how many directors even make films annually anymore? And yet he was doing like what? Enemy, Prisoners, Sicario, Arrival, Blade Runner, 5 in 5 years. How can you do that? Like an absolute machine, and then a 4-year break to get this today. So I know we haven't sort of got into the meat of it, but to me, Denis Villeneuve, I'm not going to get horrible and do Oscar shit now, but hold off giving him the Oscar until part 2. That's all I'm going to say, and I reckon that's probably what they would do. But that's a different discussion for maybe March next year.
Yeah, or indeed the end of this spoiler review. I know we've got an Oscar section, so we'll probably be talking about what it could go up for. Before we go into the characters, I just sort of like, as a rough overhaul, sort of like biggest positive, biggest negative. We do have a comment from Charlie in the comments. There are no negatives, and maybe you're right. As I say, I'm very new to Dune, and this was kind of my first Frowe. I don't know the word. First time dipping into the world of Dune because I didn't read the book beforehand, and that's on me. Biggest negative. This is kind of lessened for me because I have watched this a second time and I did enjoy it a lot more second viewing than I did the first time watching it. Maybe some of the characters are quite dour. There's not as much personality, and because it's a part one, you are getting half of everyone's character arcs. Basically, you can't sort of view it as a whole package, seeing where character threads lead to and the change that those characters have. So, you know, Paul, and I don't think this is a fault of Timothée Chalamet. I don't think it's a fault of the film. Maybe it's a fault of Paul's character in general. As a character on paper, he's just a little bit boring to me. He's just kind of the destined for greatness. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy kind of thing, for Monty Python quote. He's just it's that atypical
it's
character,
the hero
right?
journey.
What's the opposite of Mary Sue? What's the other one? Gary Stew, is it? It's just that kind of character. You know, he's good at everything. He's destined for greatness. He's going to be amazing at everything. He's going to lead the people to a better tomorrow. All that, but there's not really much personality behind him. And there are some, you know, great moments of sort of emotional release for the character, where, especially a scene where he's in the tent with Jessica and he kind of snaps at her that you've made me a monster. Essentially, you've created me. And that was good stuff, but I don't know if it's a sense of humorousness, or you have Jason Momoa's character, I'd probably say isn't the comic relief character, but he has more input to him. He has more charisma. He has more charm. Everyone else, not to say they turn in bad performances, but it's a very stark, almost emotionally disconnected film. And I don't know if that is Dune. If that is Dune, then maybe I would argue, could they have injected a little bit more personality into things? I don't know. That's if I'm reaching for a negative. And then I guess it's also kind of the ending. It being a part one, it does just go shum, cut to credits. It does all, but I don't know if it is almost halfway exactly in the novel to where the divide is, if it's a little bit over halfway. But it's the sake of adaptation, you know, like I'd say each part has to have a sense of a beginning, a middle, and an end. And although it's not the grand scope, and we haven't sort of got this broad scope of the story completely told just yet, and the real emotional payoffs and everything are going to come at the very end of part two, there still needs to be a sense of resolution in part one. You know, going to Lord of the Rings here, and it's not just because I've got a Lord of the Rings bias at all, but you look at Fellowship of the Ring, it's a part one, but the end of that film does have an emotional resonance where all the characters are going off. People arrive at decisions and everything like that. And I don't really feel like we got that at the end of this film. It's just, you know, he's going from A to B, and that's it. There wasn't any kind of massive change in his character from kind of where he was starting off in this film for me. So it does feel like it is a clean divide rather than a good sense of resolution and finale to this film before going into the next one. I've waffled a lot there, and I don't know if that makes any sense.
No,
it makes sense in my head, but they'd probably be my only two negatives I could think of with this thing.
The Paul stuff, and this isn't a quick side. I enjoy him more as I read more into the book. That's what I will say about the character, but I think it's just a very typical hero journey character. Who's the most boring Harry Potter character? Harry Potter. Who's the most boring Lord of the Rings character? Frodo Baggins. Luke Skywalker, probably until they change the formula in Empire Strikes Back, is very boring in that first film. And I think it's just the very typical hero journey type character arc that so many, it's been ingrained in centuries worth of storytelling. So I'm like that with that. Again, he's the Messiah type figure. He's going to lead them in. And one thing they did is obviously they pushed the religion stuff more, because that is definitely something in the latter half. So it's really interesting to see them poke that in a little bit more with the part one things. But the resolution, I'm fine with the ending. I think it feels very resolved that he's now with the Fremen. He's a part of the Fremen, and he's going to go off with them into the distance to try and reclaim his land. I think it's very Fellowship of the Ring. Just in terms of they're still on the way to the. I'm like what you said earlier. I was 13 when I saw the Rings. I was like, wait, this film's not finished. I thought there's meant to be 3 of them, and then you realize it's the same story. So I think it was very similar. That if there's a point in the book to end it, they picked a better place. I think you can't have it any longer. And also, if you do it shorter, you're sort of selling it short of who this character's not got anywhere yet. He's not even got to the Fremen. So where could they end it? So it's a tricky one. I'm actually going to bring Yanis's comment, which I love. The only negative is the break between part 1 and part 2. I'm actually with him on that because now I've read it properly. Now I've seen it. I'm just sat there like, Lord of the Rings. They knew they only had to wait a year for each one. I think we'll be waiting 2 years. I think December 2023 is going to be my initial bets for when Dune Part 2 comes out. But it's a really interesting. So I have seen a lot of people talk about the characters online. I really enjoy a lot of them, and again, it's that knowledge of the only, to me, complete character acts in this film are Duke Leto and Duncan Idaho. Asterisk because they die.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I'm kind of sat here with it because
that's what I mean. There's like, does Baron have a resolution at the end? Not really. It kind of just drops off. A lot of side characters just disappear out of the narrative. You've mentioned that maybe there's room for them to come back in the next one, but we get no resolution to them. I can kind of agree maybe with Paul. Yeah, he's got a sense of direction. He's with the Fremen now, and they're going off on towards their next adventure. But there's a lot that does just kind of that's it. That's all we're getting for this part, And
I think it is just because the book does as well that a character will go out and you won't see him again till X amount of pages, or it's left status unknown as to are they alive, are they dead. So you do get a lot of that in this as well. But I think a lot of it's storytelling choices. If they could have showed other characters, but then it just would have been like their face popping up at the end, and then we'll see you in a couple of years, folks. So I think leaving some unresolved was probably the better way to deal with a sort of slap down the line break in the part. But the ending scene, one actually thing I want to add in marketing, the fact that I'm annoyed the worm was in the trailer last year because that was like the last 10 minutes.
That would have been a great. It would have been a great reveal, I think, in the film if we'd have just got it. Boom, take it in there. But I get it for marketing. You want to sell the worms, don't you? I get it.
You need the worms, and everyone knows the worms are coming, so don't hide it. But that's something that it did. I hate films that have marketing. Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the famous one, isn't it? Here's the rhino. Here's the final shot of the film. It's not just the Spider-Man 2, but so many films do. The whole final shot is actually in the trailer, and this film, just the worm thing was a bit much for me. But let's talk. We've spoke about characters. Let's actually go into it now. We'll kick things off with House Atreides, obviously based on the planet Caladan, which I love. I love that these planet names and how they look. That's just again the directions of. But House Atreides. Let's start with Paul. Timothée Chalamet. He's had a big week. French Dispatch came out the same day. Not many actors get 2 films at the same day. Couldn't be more different. But I guess we've kind of spoken about him, but I like him in this film. I think he plays Paul well. I don't have much else to say because I've just said that it's that very stereotypical hero journey, but it's what you said. When they let him act, we can see how good he's at doing it. And I think he's obviously not just one of the most hyped up actors working today. We know he's playing Willy Wonka in the Origin film, the musical, and we know I don't know if he had an Oscar nomination yet. I think if he did, it might have been for Beautiful Boy or for Little Women, but Chalamet is everywhere. And I think, again, film people know this. So when I started, when I was like, Timothée Chalamet, he's like, never heard of him, don't know anything he's been in, don't know what he's done. And I was like, oh no, of course you wouldn't know him as the young Casey Affleck from Interstellar, would you either? Because that's probably his biggest film until Dune's come out. So it's really interesting with Chalamet that I think, because and this is for the whole film, I'm going to actually say this, he's been able to bring in not just names, but actors to play these roles. And I think a lot of franchises today will sort of have a character and be like, we want this actor, and we'll turn the character into them. Whereas this was very much, we're bringing in the actors to play these characters. And I think that's how I felt with all of them. That I know that counts a bit as an ensemble, but there was nothing miscast. I don't think anyone was under or overused. I think everybody came in knowing who they were playing, and they played that character well, and it worked. And that's just a very basic overall. Obviously, we'll get into some of them properly, but that's how I felt initially with the casting. But yes, how's talk about Paul, because again, it's just a lead character, isn't it?
Yeah, I haven't seen Timothée Chalamet in an exhaustive amount of things, in all honesty. This is definitely sort of like the biggest film, I think, he's done so far, easily, just from the scope of it, especially because he's playing the lead in a 2-part adaptation. I think he's great in, what he's given. That is the character of Paul. So my reservations on the character of Paul, I stand by. I just think Paul on paper is a boring character. But I do think that, Timothée Chalamet does bring in a lot more of those emotional moments when he can. As I mentioned, that scene in the tent's probably one of my favorite of his. And you do really get that sense that he is this put upon, haunted guy who's basically been genetically modified for a single purpose of being a messiah, which is, you know, you got all your religious connotations there you can bring into it and everything like that. One more Lord of the Rings comparison. I'm sorry, but this is almost like adaptation for me, and this is where I think that, you know, do you make it as faithful as possible? And you've read the book. I don't know if this depiction of Paul is as faithful, directly faithful.
I'd say it's very accurate. Very,
yeah,
I'd say that 100%. I don't think any character in this film. We'll have a conversation about Batista because we question mark over what they're doing with characters. But in terms of taking that character from the book, putting him into a film, I think they all handle it well. If that makes sense, that there's that respect for the source material, but the actor's not doing like. Some actors could come in and do their own thing. Like I don't know who'd be an obvious one, like Harrison Ford. You're going to get Harrison Ford version of the character, whereas this one was we're getting Paul from pages to screen now. Yeah. And I think they've gone in. I think again that comes down to Denis Villeneuve's direction of them and how he's probably kept them in house. And I think also a lot of these actors who spoke so highly of the book, I think they also know it's a privilege to. I'm going to have to keep bringing up Lord of the Rings. They all knew heading in the task at hand that there's a source material that's decades old that is treated with the utmost respect. It is massive for its genre, all that usual stuff. I think any actor ever approached, I'm like, yeah, I'm just here for a bit of cash to get my name out there. And I would say that happens with a lot of superhero films now. Some actors go into the superhero films to get their name, get their rep, go build a career off it. I wouldn't say Star Wars has had it. I think Star Wars is a bit like Dune, that there was a respect for that material, but also that makes them the household name, whereas Dune was, I want to get this adaptation done right.
Yeah, and if it is accurate to the book, then like as you say, then that's fair enough. And this is where you get the divide between sort of like what the purists want and kind of what works for an adaptation. And this is where with the character of Paul especially, I'd have liked to have seen them be a bit more loose with the adaptation and maybe introduce some new elements. In the comparison to Lord of the Rings that I'm going to is the character of Aragorn. Now, in the book, he's dead set from the beginning. He knows he's kingly. He wants to be king. He's destined to be king. He carries the sword around with him at the beginning. He goes on long monologues about, all these lengthy, pretentious things of all how amazing he is and what he's going to do. Whereas in the film, they took that character out and they thought, that's really boring for a film. If you've got a character who's just perfect, who's kingly and everything, there's no growth there. There's no character development. So what they did was they gave him that he doubts himself, that he fears that he's going to go the same way as his ancestors, and he doesn't want to be king and he shies away from his destiny. And then eventually, as the film goes on, he grows and comes around to it and becomes the king in the final movie. And that's where you've got, some purists might hate that, for example, because they've took a character that they know from the novels that they love and they've kind of tinkered with it and messed with it completely differently. But I would argue it works better filmically and from a character perspective and from an adaptation, that we like to see characters that are imperfect and that grow. And I just feel like Paul from the beginning is perfect. He might come into his skills a little bit more, there's this concept called the voice, which is, I would say is like a Jedi mind trick, but then I have to keep telling myself that this came out before Star Wars. So Star Wars' Jedi mind trick is like Dune. So there's bits like that he develops, but pretty much from the beginning, he's been trained to perfection. He's been trained in the ways of sort of like the Bene Gesserit. So he's got almost like the telepathy, his physical prowess. He's destined to be greatness. He's going to be a messiah. He's going to be this. He's going to be that. And I don't really feel like there's much growth there. So I think that's where I find his character a little bit boring. And that's where I think as an adaptation, they could have added a bit of levity in there or something. Not to say this, I want this to be like a ha-ha comedy film, but just a bit of something just to make it, I don't know, not as sort of black and white as, oh, he's great pretty much from the beginning, That's not to take away from the performance. As I said, I think that all the performances in this film are absolutely solid. And if we're going to talk about another character, probably my favorite performance in the entire film and probably one of my favorite characters in the film is Rebecca Ferguson as Jessica. Absolutely, she's just phenomenal. I basically don't have anything else to say about a character. Very, very varied performance as a mother, as a member of the Bene Gesserit, as a wife. Or no, she's not a wife, is she? She's a concubine. You should have married her. She's just astounding. Everything that I see her in, every film that she comes out in, she's just brilliant. And I think she's hands down probably my favorite thing in this movie. Well, my favorite character, at least, I would say.
Yeah, she's I mean, pretty much everyone's cast, but I feel that she's born for this role. I look at her and can't see anyone else. And obviously, when I was reading the book, I obviously knew I'd get a name, I'd Google them, see who's playing them. And okay, that's Rebecca Ferguson. And yeah, she's perfect in this film. What they do with her, I think some people say they give her like a more detailed role. It still adapts that perfectly. Her role in the book, her with, I kept saying Timothee, her with Paul. I've got to bring. I keep seeing tweets out online. I think it's really funny. It's like, here's like those hardcore sci-fi films. Here's Baron Harkonnen of the planet D Prime, all that kind of stuff. It's
Paul.
And again, it's like Luke and Leia, and then you've got Chewbacca, Yoda, Han Solo, and all that sort of funny stuff. But
well, he does maybe possibly get a different name.
He will.
Yeah.
It's a couple of different ones, pronunciations maybe, but Rebecca Ferguson's unbelievable. Jessica, again, playing, it's the whole one half of you is obviously the not the concubine of what would you call it? What's a duke? It's a duke, isn't it? It's like you're highborn. It's like you're not married, but you're kind of there. So you've got your highborn sort of responsibility, but then in the background you've got your Bene Gesserit stuff, which is like a weird, essentially witches.
Yeah, like they're like pulling all the strings. Essentially, they've got all the power. They make.
And they've been doing it for centuries, crossing bloodlines. Like they've sort of quietly ruled in the shadows for centuries, and it's really fascinating with this because like that's a tricky concept to get on film. But Rebecca Ferguson is so good at it. The sort of crying on command type stuff that she knows her son's in danger and she sells it to you. And she sells that he might not be able to. And I think that's the big thing is that Rebecca Ferguson was so well cast. I think if Lady Jessica doesn't work, the film doesn't work. I think it's as simple as that. That's someone that has to be a maternal figure, but also a point of reasoning. And you get that amazing shot of his vision where it's got her with the tattoos and everything. And it's really interesting to see what is going to happen with her character. Sorry, obviously this is a spoiler video, so we can say she's pregnant. And again, it's that stuff of Duke Lester that they told her you were to bear females, but you didn't. You bore a male and blah blah blah.
Did they have a choice in that? I wanted to ask you that. Are they kind of genetically modified in the future, in the year 10,000, whatever it is? Can they pick?
I think. I don't fully. I've the way I've kind of interpreted is that the sisterhood could, because they're essentially witches. So I think they had the power to do it if they wanted to, but Jessica didn't. She sort of let it naturally happen, and it was a boy. So that's. I
didn't know if they could pick her if it was like the whole Henry VIII Tudors thing, where he was mad at all his wives for keep giving him daughters. Like, I want a son. Like they could make that happen, right? It's a 50-50 chance, but I don't know if in this, if it was like a, you want a son, you can mess around with some chromosomes.
I think it's a bit of that.
You got a son.
I think they can do it, the weird witches, but it's a really interesting like subplot that's going to come back into the next film as well, which is worth saying that they're very interesting. And I think there was they'd greenlit a show about the sisterhood that was going to be a HBO Max show that Denis Villeneuve would direct the pilot. Obviously, this is all pre HBO Max taking 2021 slate. So in the same way that Batman Matt Reeves was going to do his cop show also for HBO Max, they would be interesting to see done properly. And again, I've only read the first book. I've not read the sequels. I've not gone. I know there's like history books as well. There's loads of stuff to take into account. So, they're a very interesting concept. But Lady Jessica is a very tough character to play. And I think because there's so much to her and that she's so integral to the plot that you look at the marketing, rightfully so. You've got the Duke all over it, talking about Oscar Isaac, that he is the father figure, he is the Duke. And it's a really good way to sort of have him be a forefront so that Lady Jessica's going to assume control and be the one that guides him on his journey. And I just love some of the conversations with the person side that, says, he goes, oh, because it's the Duke's partner. And he's like, no, like, you've got power from your father, but your mother's more powerful. It's really interesting seeing that kind of stuff. But I loved Rebecca Ferguson in this. Again, I'm saying I don't think I've ever seen her be bad in anything. Reminiscence was I actually really liked Reminiscence, but she was great in that. She's wonderful in the Mission Impossible films.
Dr. Sleep, she was brilliant.
Dr. Sleep, she stole it for me. But is it the Hat? I always forget the character's name.
Rosie the Hat.
Rose the Hat. That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
But she was born for this role. I can't see many people doing it. And again, just phenomenal work.
And you mentioned the Duke there with Oscar Isaac. Let's talk about him because he's brilliant in this too. And it's nice to see him actually, get given good material to work with. Not to mention another sci-fi property.
No,
right
no,
there,
I'll be bringing that up. Don't worry.
yeah. I mean, it's
You
when
like the reference,
when
by
the
the way?
image was released, right? When he's in like the power
That's why
armor kind of thing
everything
with the shoulder pads, and it's like, yeah, this is what we could have got, but no, we didn't. And he said he wanted to be a pilot in this film.
That's the. I was like, is this an Easter egg? And I was like, because I laughed on the first. There was a couple of laughs on the first viewing about the whole pilot thing, and I was like, okay, it's not just me, but that first image when that came out, I remember looking at it, I was like, what is this? Like, phenomenally. Like, I am blown because Oscar Isaac is a wonderful actor, and they keep joking. There's all Twitter things. He's like one of the horniest actors in the world. Like, if you on his interviews, like him and Jessica Chastain on red carpets is unnatural. Like, if you were her husband, you'd be concerned that he just seems like an absolute, like, just a bloke that can't be stopped. And he did a weird interview, like he was like licked his finger, stuck it in Pedro Pascal's ear, and he did it to Rebecca Ferguson on Dune press last week. And he's I absolutely love Oscar Isaac. He's a wonderful actor, but I can't see anyone else play the Duke now. I've seen him do it. That he has, not that I've seen him be fathers in films before, but he just has a kind of presence that he's like warm and welcoming. But if he had to turn it up, if he had to sort of get his hands dirty, he can do it as well. But he's really one of the most tragic characters of the entire film, and my favorite scene in the entire book is his death scene, and that's one of the things I was really, really excited to see in this film, because I knew how integral that scene is and how well done it is. But Oscar Isaac was just wonderful. And yeah, that Instagram post again, when John Boyega commented saying, "Why didn't we get this in Star Wars?"
Did he actually say that?
John Boyega did, yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And what a beard, what a man.
Yeah. The jacket as well that he has, like the high collared jacket that he has. I think one of my favorite scenes with him, it's mostly all the character scenes, to be honest. It's when they're just before they're about to leave Caladan, and he has that heart-to-heart with Paul. It's this beautiful landscape. I don't know where they shot it. It looked like it was shot in Scotland or Ireland or something, maybe, but it's kind of coastal. Oh, okay, that makes sense. But you've got like the sea in the background, these beautiful sort of like meadows, cliffs that they're on, and you expect him to be sort of like this really pushy father. In like any other role, it would be like, this is the man you've got to be, and he's like, if you want to be a leader, you can be, but there's no pressure. I never wanted to be. It's like, I never wanted to be a duke. I wanted to be a lumberjack. And again, another Monty Python reference there. But I love their dynamic, and especially after the first worm attack as well, which I know we'll be talking about not too long. But how genuinely concerned he is, for his son, but he's also authoritative, and he's like, don't do that again. You are the future of this house, and you can't put yourself in harm's way. Even when he enters a room, there's that scene where you've got like the meeting, like that boardroom meeting, where you've got basically every member of the house there. And, he walks in, everyone rises to their feet, and he does command that presence. And it's just funny when you look at him in other films like X-Men Apocalypse, where he's like, from the ashes of this world. And then you see him in an actual role like this. It's, it's completely different. But
yeah, and I love the fact that he likes doing big films. I think he's just done the TV series of Jessica Chastain, Letters from a Marriage or something like that. But he's a very talented actor that he's happy to do big films, independent films, TV. I think he's someone that's attracted to the projects. And again, he would have signed up to this knowing this role. It's a one film for him. He's playing this tragic character. And again, just his death scene, the image of him sort of crumpled up on the chair, the whole like gas and everything. It was really interesting getting to see him. And I just think, to me, you mentioned that the worm team, it just shows his leadership. And I think that's what he's all about as well, that he's a leader at heart. And I think if you look at the whole core of this plot, is essentially that the Emperor is scared of House Atreides. That yes, they know we'll get into Game of Thrones actually in a bit, but House Atreides is scared the Emperor. They've hired the two best fighters in the Imperium. They call their version of the Galaxy. It's so weird saying Imperium and I'm saying Galaxy for stuff like this, but House Atreides has amassed the best soldiers, the best of the best, and the best teachers for it. And under Letter's leadership, he's a threat, and the Emperor must kill them. And it's as political a plot as you could think. I always thought this to be a really simplistic Star Wars, like bad man needs killing, when actually this was way more Game of Thrones. When I was reading the book, I was like, I think I said, she was like, this is way more like Game of Thrones than Star Wars, and it's that like political adultship that comes with it. But Duke Leto, I think, was perfectly cast, and that's a lovely little segue into his sort of right hand men as well. with Josh Brolin. I guess we can mention as Gurney
playing Thanos, which is great.
It was the trailer. I think when that trailer happened, where he says, "I am smiling," I was like, even my dad. I think we were watching Shang-Chi and they played that, and he's like, "That's Thanos," and I was like, "Yeah." Like his voice is so iconic now. But again, if you're after a strict military personnel type who's going to be a right-hand man, Josh Brolin has that presence, and
he's terrifying.
Every time he shouts,
his
and
age,
his character has a really interesting backstory that we're not going to find out in this film. I'm going to just leave it there. I'm not saying anything about the book. I'm not saying about I know the 1980s one is played by Patrick Stewart with the Pug, which completely blew my mind.
Great.
But
love it.
He does, obviously, as you said earlier, he just disappears out of the film as like status unknown. Obviously, for those that do know, will know his fates. But I think Josh Brolin, from the scenes we got of him, was really interesting.
Yeah, sorry, I was just looking at this comment that we've had come in. It's quite interesting, actually. Would you like this movie more if there were more unknown actors? Does this all-star cast distract you sometimes from the story spectacle? I think that's quite interesting. I think that, getting a cast of this caliber across the board is not just for like the strength of the film, maybe, but it's definitely to do with the marketing as well. If you've got all unknowns in there, especially with a film like Dune, which is a big gamble for any studio, I think if you had all unknowns, there's not really a draw. Average moviegoer goes, "Oh, it's Aquaman. I want to go and see this new Jason Momoa film." They pick the cast out with, as we said, Josh Brolin, maybe Javier Bardem. You've got Oscar Isaac in there. You've got this all-star cast. Even Zendaya now recently, has been knocking it out of the park with all these films. So I do think it's a way to appeal to a lot of people. Not to see, there's been other big films. Oh, I'm going back there again. I'm sorry, guys. Lord of the Rings, though, you had your big actors in there, like, well-respected actors, Christopher Lee, Ian McKellen, some other people along the way, but for the most, Sean Bean, for example, but for the most part, that cast was a lot of unknowns, especially in sort of like the core cast. So I do think it can be done. And I think, there's probably thousands of unknown actors out there that could have played these characters equal, on par, if not even better, perhaps, than some of these. But it's all part of the movie studio, isn't it? It's, get the big names in. And that's not a negative against this film just because there's big names in it. It didn't distract me too much because, well, number one, Javier Bardem was just completely... I didn't even realize it was him until like the very end of the film. And then I kind of clocked that it was him. So I think and you do see the characters, I don't just go, "Oh, that's Rebecca Ferguson." I go, "That's Lady Jessica." I don't go, "Oh, that's Timothee Chalamet." I go, "That's Paul Atreides." So
the only one I have it for,
Jason Momoa. A little bit.
Oh no, sorry, I was going more Thanos. Like I just Momoa
it's the
kind
voice.
of.
It's the voice.
Yeah, it's like, and that's it. It's not the performance. It's not his look. It's if you shut. I was sat there. You could shut your eyes and you think like, we'll just say that he is the bit I talk about Paul, like some of the Paul like weeping stuff, like "I'm not in the mood, Gurney," and it's like Thanos like screeching back, like in the mood. I'm there like, I could see him fighting Iron Man right now with my eyes shut, and like I think that's more of a status of how culturally significant Marvel has become.
Yeah,
I think it's more that than the fact that I don't think they ever went into this film saying, who we really need? We need Thanos in Dune. But some films will do that, and Momoa is going to be an interesting conversation because by talking actually about Duncan, that's a good segue. But the biggest, I don't want to say worry because I do like Jason Momoa, but when I first saw the trailers before I'd read the book, I was sorry if anyone can hear fireworks. I can hear fireworks. So that really attracts me. Jason Momoa, I thought, oh, they've just got Jason Momoa in to be Jason Momoa, and I was very nervous about that. And when I was reading the book, I was like, whoa, I was like, Duncan Idaho is actually really well cast. And I was like, I don't see it in a bad way. I don't think Jason Momoa is a bad actor, but I was very surprised at how Duncan Idaho is actually just a lot like Jason Momoa. And, the fact he's shaved, I want to say this actually, he's shaved for this film. And I believe that was the first time he'd shaved his beard in like 8 years or something insane. And fair play to him, because I know some actors that would turn up to a film, say, "I am not changing my hair," and it happens though, doesn't it? Like
or
some
mustache,
actors,
right?
what's the famous one? Is it
Henry
Mark?
Cavill?
No, like some Jennifer Lawrence, I'd say Mystique. As she
Oh,
got
yeah.
bigger and bigger, you got less and less blue paint makeup, and
Yeah.
I think that happens on films that some actors get so big they can put their power play onto the studio. Whereas Momoa, I think he was very grateful to be a part of the film. He's actually done most of the marketing compared to a lot of the others. But I just think him as Duncan, I think the film needed a character like Duncan, and Momoa is maybe my favorite. One of my favorite characters. I love all of them in this, but Momoa is in my top 3 characters probably for the film in terms of like what I enjoyed seeing and who was involved. But yeah, I think Momoa brought a lot more to Duncan Idaho than the book was great with him, but we didn't get enough of him in the book because I think I said to you, didn't I? In the way he dies in the book, when I was reading it, it's almost like, I've only read it once, so apologies, I can't get it word for word for people at home, but it's like the door opens up and Duncan's like body falls through and the Sadakor here. And it's like you've just missed an action set piece. And I understand why they did it. But I know, like, in this film, I'm like, you just know Momoa's going to go out in some blaze of glory. And my word, it's the most I've ever been on the Momoa hype train. And I have met him many years ago, post Game of Thrones, pre Aquaman. I got a photo with him. And I was there like, yeah, like I can look at this pitch now and think, that's Duncan Idaho, one absolute unit.
I do think that was like marketing, though, wasn't it? Especially in that first trailer, where it was like, "You put on some muscle, really? No."
Yeah.
And they're like the quippy Aquaman kind of things and the same kind of attitude, and that's the stuff that you presented with in the trailer. I thought, oh no, like there's a reason they put him in here, but yeah, he is a real character, and I like his friendship with Paul. Like, it's very genuine from the beginning. You believe it, and he's genuinely just a really cool character. I love that he's the one they send out on like the advanced team, and he ingratiates himself with the tribes and everything. He almost becomes one of them. So yeah, he's a great character, and he can also do the physical stuff. We know he can. He's physically imposing. He does all the sword play, but I'm glad he wasn't as quippy as the trailer made it out to seem like. So I guess that's a positive.
And
I guess we should.
Sorry, I was saying there wasn't much comic relief in the film either. Like a lot of
what
you would say is comic relief was in the trailers.
Yeah.
Which is also a good thing because the last thing you want is a tense drama to then get thrown in with all these random one-liners out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Duncan, we'll speak about his scene later. But Jason Murr, for me, again, absolutely. And also, I guess you could say he's in House of Warner Brothers. He's always marketed the films. He's spoken up against them, and they're still happy to have him all over marketing, which is another thing. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was going to say, shall we move on to the villains? Because there's a lot more we need to talk about, and I realise that we're coming up to an hour. So let's move to Gady Prime then. We've got House Harkonnen, however you want to pronounce it. We're moving to the bad guys.
House Lannister.
Yes, exactly. And, when I was watching this, I was like, my God, George R. R. Martin didn't half cliff so much from this. The royal decree at the beginning. You've got Atreides is basically Stark, the good guys, essentially the through and through good guys, being summoned to the capital, or and then there's all bad stuff there. There's a trap waiting for them. There's so many comparisons. That could be an interesting video in itself.
That's what I thought. As well as reading, I was like, Martin's nicked all this.
Yeah,
and Harkonnen is Lannister, and do we kick off with the Baron?
So I'm going to start with a comment here, and I really want to agree with this, and I don't know if I can. We had a comment from CFC earlier that said the villain was good, he stole the show. I agree, the villain was brilliant. I think, oh God, I always think Stellan Skarsgård. There are so many bloody Skarsgårds out in films. I have to remember which one. Bootstrap Bill as a Baron Harkonnen.
It sounds like him too.
Yes, he does. Yeah. I love it though. I love it. I think he's perfectly cast for this character. I thought he was going to be in it more, and I really wanted him to be in it more. And I think one of the biggest missed opportunities was the introduction to the character. One of the only chapters that I can remember from what I listened to in the audiobook was, and I think you probably remember this as well as like a standout scene, was the globe scene. In the book, I think when you're introduced to the Baron, he stood behind a globe and he's like talking about his plans. And then he moves away from the globe and he's basically the size of what he was stood behind. And I thought that's such a perfect visual look for the character. And we don't really get anything like that. There's nothing really visually interesting from the first introduction to his character. And there might only be 3 scenes peppered in. And a lot of those scenes are very, very quick, exposition filled, maybe 30 seconds to a minute scenes with the villains. And I thought that was such a shame because this film is juggling loads of stuff, and this is why I'm kind of hoping there's an extended cut along the way. Maybe like 20 minutes here could just do that, get us a bit more villain time. There are moments where it just cuts to the planet and the planet looks fantastic. We've had so much time on Caladan and got a sense of that culture and the visuals and the characters there. I'm like, can we get the same treatment for the villains? And you could maybe argue that the villains in Dune are very cut and dry. It is very black and white. They all look evil. They're all in black leather. It's always raining and dingy, and they're in dark
Old
chambers and everything like
schools,
that.
black eyes.
Stormtrooper kind of bad guys that they've got behind them. Like, they're clearly the villains. There's no airs and graces about that. The villain himself is this huge, gargantuan, disgusting slob of a character who's greedy and wants money and wealth and food and gluttonous. It's very sort of black and white in terms of villains in this, but nonetheless, the visuals were great, and I kind of wanted more of it, and I didn't feel like we got much of the Baron in this film at all. And then by the end of it, he's just kind of in an oil bath and just says, kill them all, and then bloop, and that's it. That's all we get from him, which I'm hoping it leaves room for more in part 2, because I do think that we could have done more of that villains. And again, kind of going to another planet, and I forget the name of it. It's where the troops are from. And again, the visuals are great. It's raining. You've got everyone in formation. You've got people who are like in upside down crucifix positions, and they're stripped naked, and it's like human sacrifice, and blood's pooling in wells that they're like donning battle paint with. There's some Mongolian throat singing going on too, which is probably one of the most awesome bits of the film. And it's such a short scene. And it's like, I wish we could have spent a little bit more time with the villains and developed them equally to like the same treatment that House Caladan did really at the beginning.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on this. The Baron's a very interesting character because there's really not much to him, in truth. Like, he's a very two-dimensional villain. I feel that I hate doing the whole in the book thing. In the book, he's the same. Like, he's evil. He is the defining face of evil. I guess you could say that. I mean, what I will say, I don't want to keep bringing Lord of the Rings into it. We had a rival to the tomato eating scene with how I absolutely despise people that eat loud. Not as bad as the tomato scene, but I just get uncomfortable with like loud eating stuff. And the Baron's a tough one. It's a very weird character to put on screen. It's a very tough character to put on screen. It's probably actually a better term, because again, it's not makes someone so unnaturally fat. It's not funny. I think that so many like obese characters are so easy to laugh at and stuff. And with this Baron, you need to make him sort of intimidating. I never felt that from him. So I think it's a really tricky character because I don't care too much about him. But you also don't get a threat as far as a villain goes with his character, that you understand he's got this master plan, that he's obviously got Dr. Yue into it, and you get all this, and he's going to eradicate the family and whatnot. And I think when you said it before we hit record, that he's actually smart because he knows to put the shield on. He thinks something's not right here, and he does. So he's a very intelligent man. But again, it's that, how do you translate book inner thoughts into putting it on screen? And I think Baron's a character that in so many of the scenes, it's like, I've reprogrammed this doctor into doing my bidding because I've kidnapped his wife, and yes, evil for the sake of being evil. And it's, the sort of say their plans out loud. And I know this one does a scene where we do get him discussing the plan, where the Emperor's going to give you the troops, so you do know it's coming. But I think it's a really tough character, which I just didn't care for. And I think that's not just the film, that's the book as well, which is a shame. But I was obviously more hyped for Batista playing Beast Raban, only because I'm a massive Batista fan. We obviously had our Spectre 10-minute chat on it, being a highlight from the film, but he doesn't get a lot to do in this film. Like, the two shots of him in the film are literally in the trailers. Him beheading everyone and him walking. I guess you get the shouting scene where he gets to like shout and act for a minute, but the villains are one of the weaker points of this film, but I think they're going to come into it more if in a part 2. But also, I think it's really hard to sell it. I think sometimes when you've got such two-dimensional villains, it's really hard for them to put them on screen. Like, for example, Batista, I think, so if having the chat, we've kind of had this. He refers to Baron as uncle. Now, there's a character in the book, Fenther Raid or something. I'm not good with the book name so far.
Fade
Rauther.
Rauther. Yeah.
And he's the nephew of the Baron, and he's the future of House Harkonnen. The Baron knows this. And he has like one scene in the book, and then he's got like 2 scenes later on in the book, like right at the start and then right at the end, essentially. And when Batista said uncle, I was like, oh, have they formally merge two characters together to be Batista? Is he going to be both the nephew and Beast Rabban? Because Rabban has nothing to do. He has the squeeze hard a bit. And you just know that he was a bad man. He killed many people. He's a nasty ruler. And that was the plan. And it's like, that doesn't work on film. But if you merge the two together, and this is where I'm quite intrigued by that, I think, again, we don't know what the plan is. But Batista in part 2 to get an extended role, I think will work much better from a storytelling perspective, because I think sometimes when you've got characters, and even David, I can't pronounce it, his character's more to do in the book, but he's killed by the gas, so you don't really need to build or hype him into it, because you know he's going to be done and dusted after 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see, this is where I'm like, if you've got a 5-hour adaptation, then you've got time, have the characters in there. And I was actually just looking at the cast list. You've got Sting playing Fade Routher in the 80s film, which is great. I love it. But now if they are merging that character into one very gargantuan Dave Bautista package, are you going to have, I mean, I don't want to spoil too much, but can I just say there's an altercation at some point between Paul and now potentially Dave Bautista if they do go in that direction? Again, they could completely change it, but Timothée Chalamet, Dave Bautista, I don't see how that fight is going to visually go on film, in all honesty. I mean, I'd love to see it. It's going to be an absolute train. Well, it's going to, he's going to wipe the floor with him, surely. I don't know how they're going to get around that in the film. So I hope that's not a snowball effect, but, clearly Villeneuve's got a plan. I just think, what's the point in kind of truncating characters down when you've got so much time? The 80s film had both of the characters, and that told it in a fraction of the time, and they were still kind of memorable in their own way. And to your point about the villains being two-dimensional, I absolutely agree with you. And I think the only way you can kind of get around that is either you have a memorable performance, or you just make them larger than life, cartoony, and just memorable performance-wise, maybe a little bit campy. And that's absolutely what you get in the original Dune film. Not to say that kind of performance would have worked in this one, but you have Kenneth McMillan, who played the Baron in the original. And if, for example, we had that comment there that the villain steals the show, I would agree with like the 80s film. He is so ridiculous and over the top and memorable and visual. And he's got like all pus-filled boils all over his face. He looks disgusting, and he's memorable for that. Whereas this new one, Skarsgård, great performance. The makeup's brilliant on him, but it's played a lot more straight, and we don't get as many scenes. So therefore, in this film, there's not much of an impact, I would say, which is a shame, because I think, as a character, visually, he does have that ability to be not only physically larger than life, but in terms of a character as well. And I really hope we get that in a part 2, and we get a little bit more time with the villain side, because I do think that was an area that was sadly neglected with this one.
Yeah, and I've just been Googling the Batista stuff as well. And some people think that they might introduce Fade in the sequel as a new character for the new film. I don't know. I think I wouldn't be surprised if they have merged it into Batista, but also it would make sense to not put him in part 1 and then bring him in part 2 as new characters, because there aren't many new characters in part 2, which is also worth saying, I guess. But it would be interesting to see what their plan is for that.
Shall we talk about the Fremen then? I guess that's the other faction. I mean, there are so many goddamn factions in this one, but now I didn't realize this. You read the book, and, having seen the original film now, they do gender swap a character, and I think it's Dr. Is it Leet Kynes? Is that the character's name?
Dr. Kynes, yeah.
Played in this film by Sharon Duncan Brewster. I didn't know that she was a gender flip character until you told me afterwards. And actually, she's probably one of my favorite characters in the film. Absolutely love her character, just the way she plays it, the way that she engages, even just glances where she's kind of monitoring Oscar Isaac and what kind of person he is. They've kind of invaded their world. It kind of reminded me of the whole like Native American, like white Americans coming in, taking the land and the gold and everything, and just ravaging the land. Very similar, or even to this day, you could say there are parallels to Dune. It's still going on today. But I loved her character, just the look of the character, the way she kind of commanded the scene, that she was knowledgeable of the desert and everything. And I mean, this is the spoiler review. Her death scene was awesome. The way that she took those guards out and kind of accepted it. There was that spiritual side to her character as well. I think she mentions in the film she's welcome in both village and I've forgotten the technical name for it, but basically the places where the Fremen live. I thought she was great. Siege, that's it, thank you. And then I watched the original film, and you've got Max von Sydow playing that character, which is equally as awesome. But I was thinking, why gender flip the character? You know, if you are going for a very faithful adaptation, what's the point in that? And the only thing that I can think of is that there isn't really much of outside of Jessica and maybe sort of like the truth sayer at the beginning. There isn't much of a female presence in the film outside of that, really. You know, Zendaya's kind of almost top billed, really, and she only really comes into it towards literally the very end of the film. There's not much of a female presence, I would say, outside of Jessica, so I don't know if that influenced the decision. I don't know why they decided to do that, but I don't have a massive problem with it at all, because, as I say, Jessica and her were probably two of my favorite characters, if not my favorite two characters in the entire film.
Yeah, I really like her in it. The actress that played her is Sharon Duncan Brewster, and this was something I was sort of quite not familiar with, but I didn't know much. And then when I was reading, I was like, okay, Google who's Kynes. I thought, is that Javier Bardem? And it's like, oh, okay, it's this character's been on the poster, and I was like, I've not seen or anything. And this character was interesting because of the page of say he, and you get a reveal later on, which I'm not going to say for those who haven't read it. And I look at that and think, there's a lot more impact of her being a female character, and that's what I'm going to leave that at. And also, this is a character where they expanded upon, so as sort of, I think they call it change of the juror or something like that. She actually works for the Emperor, and she has to look over Harkonnen going to Atreides and can't get involved. But I think you mentioned sort of like the performance. I think she was one of the best things in this. I think she's in that Momoa category of sort of stealing it from some of the bigger names. Mm-hmm. She has a phenomenal death scene. Quite a sad moment as well when you get the, you know, obviously it's not blood, it's water when it sort of
I love
out
that
as well.
I love that, yeah.
And the thumper, because in the book there's a reveal and it's like, oh yeah, Heinz died and a terrible fate, and it's like, we spent time with this character, and it's a very tough character because I keep saying in a thoughts out, the whole scene with the worm with the Duke. It's Kynes weighing up like this is just another Harkonnen, this is another scumbag high up, and essentially her judging him. So how can you translate onto the film? And her performance was really well done. That you're quite cold with her, you don't know if she's picked a side, and then as you spend time with her, you realize that actually she's a really interesting character. And I don't mind that they switched the gender. I've not seen too much discussion about it online, which is normally a good thing, but I think it's a character that when you sort of see their character arc, it's probably better played by a woman too. And I think for a political, I don't know if this sounds wrong, but for a political film that's got so much drama, that has so many, you know, this character betraying this person plotting. No, whether this sounds unfair, I don't mean it to. Is if Kynes was just another older bloke, you'd assume something bad's going to happen. It's because you've had so many of these, the man in suit type stereotype, and it was really interesting to have her as a Fremen. I mean, she's a Fremen anyway, but to have her be a female as well. And I just thought it was a really interesting change. And it's, again, there's not many changes to the books, but when he does do one or two, it is quite big. And I think this was maybe the biggest one. And I just think it was so much more interesting getting her on screen. And again, what a standout scene for a way to go as well. Just shot beautifully, and one of the characters that's, I think, going to have quite lasting impact. And also, again, because I don't know the actress, now I've seen her in something, and it could do really well for her career as well. Someone that's not one of the few actors in film I'm not familiar with. It's nice to see them have such a standout role.
Yeah, I'm just checking her credits now to see if I recognize her in anything. Apparently, she was in a Doctor Who special. She was in EastEnders. So, I mean, I can't remember those off the top of my head. She was also Senator Pamlo in Rogue One. There you go. So if you get your visual dictionary out, George, you might find a Senator Pamlo.
That's one of the ones that doesn't want to go to war.
Yes, well, we only remember one of those people, don't we? Let's be fair. That's a Rogue One discussion for another time, which we've already had. Maybe we'll have another one. Before we talk about, I guess we need to talk about sort of like the ending, you know, with the Fremen altercation. We've got Zendaya and Javier Bardem to talk about. Did want to bring up this because you might be able to answer this one better because you've read the book. I remembered one negative. Sardaukar soldiers should have disguised themselves as Harkonnen. Now everyone knows the Emperor betrayed House Atreides. Maybe the Emperor thought that no one would be left alive to tell. If so, this is a negative no more. Yeah, that's kind of a problem because it's not even like the Emperor spun it where Atreides betrayed anyone. You know, in Game of Thrones, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, Ned Stark was a traitor. That's why we've got to kill House Stark because they, you know, committed treason. Whereas this, it was, they never give any reason that Atreides has betrayed anyone or is causing a ruckus.
Just dress it up as a Harkonnen. So with the takeaway with this was in the book, there's like a moment when they realize there's like Sardaukar soldiers there still. Again, I'm not 100% familiar, so some book people might be losing their head at me, but the Sardaukar are there obviously in it. I don't remember the costume stuff, but I think is what Yanis put underneath it as well. The goal was to wipe out the entire family, the bloodline, everyone that was there, so no one would have ever known. And I think what this does, it sets up a scene more for future one, that we know that the Harkonnens have soldiers, but we know that there's essentially the better soldiers, the Sardaukar. They've got their own presence. I think it works better that they were in their own costumes, because I think when you get the scene of the planet, which isn't in the book, when we get to meet them for the first time, the whole world building stuff, I think it added so much more to that. And I think when we do get to part 2, you see the prophecy in the film as well. It'll be very interesting to see, are they going to be the face of the soldiers? Because we know that they're essentially not the Death Troopers, but you can look at the Harkonnens being the Stormtroopers, and these guys as the Death Troopers. They get their own theme. When they come in, they kill. They get obviously the Duncan scene, and it's really interesting. But I'd probably maybe say the same as Yanis. Maybe he thought there'd be no one left alive. I'm the same with you. I think it would have been weird to suddenly have had them be Harkonnens. I think that's something that works better on paper than in live action.
And what do this is I'm going in deep into the lore here. Maybe someone can answer this. What do the sort of like the general population think of House Atreides? Because if it did come to light that the Emperor had wiped out a house,
they'd all be on board.
What do the people think about that? Because I know that you know, obviously the planet Arrakis is sort of like the main hub of like trade and everything, because spice is what everyone demands, you know, galactically. It's what they need for space travel and for so many other things as well. What does House Atreides actually do? Does it explain in the book? Are they just a royal house that's endured for years? Do they trade in anything? Like, if suddenly one day Atreides was just wiped off the map, what would people have to say about that? What would the ramifications be of a house just disappearing overnight?
The best I can say from not only reading the first one and this, they're House Stark. They are the noble house, the one of the you get obviously normal houses, then you get the elite ones, I guess.
The old the old time ones.
One of the old ones. So they've got like origins to Earth from the thousands of years, and a famous bloodline, and their reputation is they have the best soldiers, one of the best leaders, and their reputation is that if it had have known that the Emperor had killed them, then they would have. They mentioned all the houses would be at war because of how powerful House Atreides is. And I think it's a bit like, I keep saying Stark, we're turning to Lord of the Rings and bloody Game of Thrones now. House Stark is everyone knows that the noble house, they had to forge they betrayed us, whereas this is planted as everyone knows the Harkonnens are evil. It's like they've gone to kill them. Doesn't surprise anybody. It's just a shock they've done it. That's how I would kind of say it. But no, if it had become public knowledge, and that's why Baron didn't want anybody to. That's why he wanted them killed, because he said he wouldn't kill them. So the instructions are for them to be killed essentially by the desert, which is a really interesting take. But
we have an answer though. 231. Sorry, just that answer to the whole thing. This whole plot hole that we've just come up with.
This one.
Oh, sorry. There we go. Apparently, the Baron mentions that there are no satellites over Arrakis, so the Atreides will die in the dark. I think that line was put in there for the lack of Sardaukar disguises. I don't remember that being in the film, but I've seen the film a handful of times, you know, so maybe it is, but that would get around that. Let's just rattle through these last couple of characters then. And honestly, I don't really have loads to say. I guess you have, let's talk about Javier Bardem's character of Stilgar. I love his introduction, and I don't know if this is in the book because it wasn't in the 80s film, so I don't know if they just made it up for this. When he shows up and spits in front of the Duke, and it's, you know, because moisture is so valuable. And I love that kind of culture shock, you know, different cultures, that one culture would see this as a very rude gesture and disrespectful. The other one, that's the most noble gesture you can do for someone, the most selfless gesture. So it was a great setup for the character. As I heard the voice, I was like, that sounds like Javier Bardem, but it doesn't look like Javier Bardem. And it wasn't until the very end that I realized, oh yeah, he is meant to be in this film. It must be that character. Quite a cool character. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with him in part 2. I can't really place which character he was in the 80s film, so I don't know how long he sticks around for, if he does even stick around, but I liked his character. Zendaya, there's a lot of room here, I think, again, especially compared to the 80s film, which just rattles through the entire relationship in a quick 10-second montage, to really grow her character out. Because Sean Young from from Blade Runner and from Ace Ventura: Pet Detective plays her character in the original film, and she's got like 5 lines in the film, and there's no development there, and you really don't care about her character. So again, not really much to say about her character. You get like a few little threads at the end, but boom, that is pretty much where part 1 ends, and hopefully we get a lot more of her in part 2, which I can imagine we will. I will say just sort of like the general ending of the film, which ends in this Fremen altercation. It's like this ritual, I guess, isn't it? It's sort of like a show of dominance, challenging someone to, trial by combat, essentially. And I don't think it ends on the biggest punch that I think the film thinks it does. It lacked impact for me. It lacked urgency, and the music cuts out during the fight. And it's all played in sort of, is it diegetic sound? I'm trying to think of my film studies
just normal,
just sound effects,
normal diegetic sound, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And I don't know if the lack of music took away from the urgency and the editing. It felt like it was filmed very flat, almost like it was a TV movie kind of fight. I don't know, especially when we're coming off, some of the biggest scenes in the films with the worms and everything, and then this ended really small scale, and I didn't really care why they were fighting, and I didn't care about the characters necessarily in this point. I don't know. So the ending did kind of feel a little bit anticlimactic for me towards the end, I would say.
Just going back to the Stilgar stuff. So the war room scene. Now, there is a scene in the book where he's introduced. I don't know the context of it. They've changed it. So essentially, Duncan goes off on his mission, preluding it, befriends the Fremen, gets in with Stilgar. And then there is a scene in which I vividly remember because I was trying to imagine Thanos doing it in the film. And it's like Stilgar comes in, he spits at the Duke, and like Gurney's getting really aggravated at how disgusted he's spat at him, and he's getting angry. He won't give up a knife, and it might be it might have been a different setting other than a war room, but there is a meeting, whether it's him meeting Paul or the Duke, I can't remember, but they take the first time you meet him, give it to Bardem, have this big introductory scene, and then we get him at the end, which is where he also comes back in the book, and you get him onwards from there. And Javier Bardem. We've done the Bond stuff recently, so like Skyfall fresh in the head. Such a good actor. Anything he's in, he's really good in. I don't think I've ever seen Javier Bardem give a bad performance. In truth, I think even Pirates of the Caribbean, he's great in it. He's way better than that film probably had any right for him to be. Don't know if that's unfair or not, but it's really interesting with Stilgar when he comes in. Javier Bardem, he's scene stealer again, all over the marketing, and it is one of those saying, being at the forefront of the poster in the cloak and everything, like maybe a bit too on the nose because you're in for 2 scenes, but scene stealing. But no, the answer for Fremen, Zendaya is Chani, again, extended role. I think this is one of those films that Zendaya is without doubt an A-lister now. Again, I always talk about Spider-Man. Was she like one of the Disney actresses pre being cast in Spider-Man 1? I guess you could call it Homecoming. And then now she's an A-lister. She's talking about doing directing. She's won, I think, Golden Globes and Emmys and everything. And it's a very small role in this film. But I like that they gave her a little bit, not more to do, but you get her narrating the events at the start. You get a cool few scenes with her. But we don't learn an awful lot about the Fremen, which is, I think, what part 2 is going to be designed to be. That where it ends, we see them carrying the body, and they're going over. We see someone riding a worm, and this is just the beginning, that kind of thing. And that's a line said at the end of the book, so they do it in part 1, which probably works better for this. But I think the Fremen stuff, it's hard to talk about because I know what's coming, which is where it's interesting to get your take as a new viewer. So for part 1, when I saw it for the first time on the train to London, I'd literally read up to the ending of the film. So I think I was 20 pages past where it finishes. So it was very, very fresh to me. And I think where they go next, you'd need another hour. So I think they had to end it where they did to stop it descending into chaos. So it's a really interesting one, but the ending is very sudden. And again, the stuff of Jamis is his name that he fights against. That was also something it's meant to show Paul's skill at hand-to-hand combat, that they've never seen anybody like Paul before. And it's very hard to get that going from the pages onto the book. And I think that's something that I'm always really interested in as well, that how can you take, character thoughts, inner thoughts, visions of a prophecy, and put that in live action. And they do bits of it well, but it's a very tough thing to do. But what I loved they do with him is, with Paul's visions, we get this character throughout the story. And there's one where it's like you're going to befriend somebody and travel with them, and it's that character. And again, this was probably the second, third thing I picked this up. But when Paul sees him, he sort of locks eyes in a good way, thinks, I'm destined to be friends with this person because it's in my vision. But actually, he's going to have to kill him, which is very interesting when we head further into the story. And I think that's Denis Villeneuve using things from the latter part of the books, that Paul has these visions, but are these visions correct, or does he see them in the right way? I think that's my sort of concept. If I'm waffling too much, sorry, but it gets very deep for. But the end stuff, I really enjoyed the end. But I think, as what we said, it's really hard to end this because it is. So if you've not, I guess, do I have a copy of the book with me? I don't actually think I do. I do. So if you look at the size of this is massive, obviously. There's like 3 books inside of it. So it's like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, essentially. And this ends in like Act 2.4, maybe. So it's a really hard, because you can't end it on Act 1. You can't end it on Act 2. It had to be at some point in there. And I think it's around about page 320 for those that have seen it. But yes, I understand that. And I think you mentioned some of the reviews earlier. I remember when they all came out after Venice, some people are like, oh, it just ends. I don't think it's as sudden as it looks. I think by the time you get to the ending, it does feel like you've been there for 2.5 hours. That's not a bad thing. But I don't think you can carry on past that. And I think what that's going to give to us in part 2 is we're going to get to learn about the Fremen, because they are, they mention it that, on this scouting report, there are thousands of Seeches. There could be millions of them. I'm really excited for them to bring that to screen, because that's going to be something that's very, very hard to do. And I think that's going to be such deep lore. You need that at the start of a film. You can't have that at the end, because we've already had so many introductory points. You need to bring it in. So it's a really tough thing to do.
We do get so much prophecy with Paul's character. I mean, if you were going to turn this film into a drinking game, take a shot every single time that Paul has some kind of dream, premonition, or vision. That basically is the antithesis of his character. Like, he's constantly having visions. And yeah, we are seeing glimpses of probably what will come into play in part 2. There's this, I think it was in the trailers, where there's this huge elaborate CGI combat going on of like armies clashing and worms are bursting out of the ground, and it's absolute madness. And I'm hoping that's not all part 2 is going to be, because that was some of the ropiest CGI for me, was where it's like the Tom Holland Spider-Man stuff or the Tony Stark stuff towards, the latter few Avengers films, where it's just their head plonked on a CGI body and it just looks really weird and awkward. And as I say, I love the location stuff in this. I love the real stuff. And yes, there is CGI in this film, but it felt like it was an absolute perfect blend. And I feel if you just have kind of weird, too over-the-top, acrobatic kind of fighting, that will take away from the realism. I say realism, of course, it's a fantasy film, but you know what I mean? Like the grounded sense of the planet, if we get that kind of stuff. I do question at the end, because we do see someone kind of riding a worm, not completely out of the sand, but kind of skimming along the surface. What happens when that goes under the sand? Do you just detach? Do you just like break into a walk? Can you walk? Because, the worms are attracted by sound. I have questions about that. Maybe it's a Pirates of the Caribbean Flying Dutchman kind of thing where you go underneath the sand with it. I don't know. So that was a bit strange. I don't want to give too much away. And I don't know how close the 80s film is to the book, but there's a big pivotal moment with a worm. And I don't know if that's kind of taken the thunder away a little bit from something that I thought was meant to happen later with regards to the worms and what we see of them at the end. I'm going to leave it as vague as that, because that is probably going to be a big moment in part 2. I guess, we can talk about some of our favorite scenes. I know we're on a bit of a time limit here, so I'm going to kind of rattle through these. My favorite scene, from the trailers, the thing that I was hyped about the most was seeing the worms, or as I've got it on here, the Shai Hulud, which is an amazing name for them. I love some of the names in the lore for this. I didn't want the worms to disappoint. I love giant sandworms. I think they're cool, but they have no place in Hobbit films. I will say that, because there's Dune worms in that third Hobbit film, just randomly out of the blue. And again, being a fan of the film Tremors, can absolutely see where they got the idea for those sandworms that are attracted by sound in that film. There are so many things, even Beetlejuice, the sandworms, and a desert planet in one part of it, which is very strange. But they absolutely delivered on the worms. They feel terrifying. They feel immense. You are terrified by them. And my favorite scene in the film, my favorite action scene in the film, is where the harvester is completely just eaten alive, just consumed by the worm. It's built up so well because before this point, we are kind of the character's proxy as well. We're learning about how this thing harvests the operation. If a worm comes in, they airlift it off the ground and they carry on harvesting. They harvest right up until the last second. So we're getting fed all this information, and it's the slow build. It's like, oh, there's one on the horizon. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. And then things start going wrong. It's that ticking time clock of these worms. And when you see the scope of how big these things are, and you don't even really see the whole thing, you'll see like a wave of sand go up or something, or you'll just see the mouth. And the mouth alone is all you need, because you can imagine everything that's below. It's like an iceberg. You only see a small percentage on the surface, and probably something that's 400 meters long, I think they say, don't they? They absolutely delivered on the scale. The chase scene later on, so all the worm stuff was probably my favorite stuff, but chief among them was that initial harvester thing. I think just the way it was shot, the intensity of it, when there's dust clouds and they're caught in the thick of it, or even when Oscar Isaac's being the best pilot in the galaxy, it was tremendous. So that's probably my favorite. You've got some beautiful shots as well with the siege, with the Harkonnen attack, sort of like the second act of the film, when the missiles are coming down, breaking through the shields. You've got these brilliant explosions. You've got Thanos leading a charge to space bagpipes, which was a little strange for me in the soundtrack, but maybe you think it works. The space bagpipes were a little bit strange, but it's just everything, isn't it? It's the cinematography, the way it's shot, the lighting and everything. Even the lighting, I was looking at going, this is just an absolute marvel to behold. So they're probably my two favorite scenes in the film. And as I say, the action scenes are quite few and far between in this film, but when they hit, oh boy, did they hit.
Oh, the worm scene is, I said earlier, my favorite scene in the book is the Duke Letter's death. The worm scene is the second after. It's the reveal of it. It's the build up. It's the tension. It's them spotting it in the horizon, just seeing them working their day job. It's all normal for them, but it goes back to the direction. And we'll get to Zimmer in a bit because we've not spoke about him yet for good reason. But the way, like, when the worm dives under and you get the I don't know what we'd call it, I think the song's called Tremors in the Sand or something like that, where it's the teeth, and it's just such incredible imagery to see how they've done that, how they're filming it, and just the shot of it descending into it as the teeth are all coming out, and it was just so well directed. And we kind of mentioned earlier that the marketing, it's kind of a shame they put the worm in the trailer. I get why they did. But when you've had this incredible reveal of 2 hours, probably 20 minutes when you get to it, and you just see the whole thing, it's the scope and how they can do that scale stuff. And the first rescue scene is so well done. And then you've also obviously mentioned the siege. To me was the big, but Game of Thrones, we'll get it in there again. Red Wedding. This is the fall of House Atreides. The Duke dies thinking his son's died. He thinks Jessica's died. He thinks his family's bloodline has been wiped out. Just the precision of the plan that we've seen teased coming to fruition, and how that's gone to be. And it's very odd that I love the whole the concept of the shields, like almost like a 3D layer around the body. It's really stylish that I've not seen before. Probably makes it a hell of a lot easier for the actors and people involved on set. But they're able to choreograph action. It's really smart around it, that you have to sort of be able to get into the cutthroat part to the right part of the blade or whatnot. It's a really interesting fighting dynamic that I think separates it from other franchises, other things. Because if it was just swords, you think, oh, fancy. It was swords of lasers. Oh, it's lightsabers, that kind of thing. And the shield concept was really cool, and I really liked it. And it was so simple of how they had to describe it. Blue means it's not critical. Red means it is. And
you should see the one in the 84 movie, man.
I've seen. I know you spoke.
They're like blocks. They're like rectangle blocks around it. Yeah, it's mad.
It's just amazing. And what I love is when the Atreides go, they're going to die. I mean, obviously, but you've seen a build up for the first chunk of the film. Oh, now they've recruited the Empire's army. Oh, they've got this armada. They're wealthy. How are they going to do them? and it's just so well done. That sort of 10-15 minute sequence of the way the bombs would go into the shield and then just go from like
they'd
it
like
was just,
power through the shield and then hit, and then
and it was so slow, and then it was just amazing seeing it sort of be directed. And I know the space bagpipe stuff. I loved it. It's like it's kind of the way I would describe it is House Atreides' final stand. That they're getting absolutely massacred, but they just like you've got Gurney bringing the bagpipes, you have them running at them, and then I love the bit on the stairs as well when they're sort of in sequence, like the two rows, and
cool.
and then they get the Sarda core get dropped in behind them, and they say these guys are the best. We need to see it, and it's the way that the other soldiers just back off, knowing they're done for, and we'll get to the music, but they're their own sound. They're their own. Whenever villains have their own theme, you are in for a good show, and those guys didn't disappoint. So I love that siege. I guess that goes into Duke's death as well. That scene was also done really well. A very hard scene to do because it's how you're going to kill him off, but sell this gas that's going to come out and get people. I think, again, that was me looking forward to that from reading. And they were very smart to have a simultaneous edit because in the book you get Duke's death, full chapter. Then you kind of get where Paul and his mum are. So, so to interject it whilst it's happening was also, I think, really well edited by the crew. But
I did think it was a bit silly of the Baron clinging for dear life to the ceiling. That was a little bit goofy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if that's in the book where he's on the ceiling or.
I don't remember on the scene. I know that he can quote. He gets like a taste of it in his tongue, but he was smart enough to react when the others weren't. Mm-hmm. That's what I always remember them saying. So it kind of fucked up his plan because his goal was for Polka Dot Man to rule Arrakis.
And it was Polka Dot Man, wasn't it? I knew I reckon. Yeah, it was.
I mean, to talk about the death of Duncan Idaho.
Yeah, let's do it.
I said earlier, that's hyping up Momoa, and I do like Momoa, but I'm not a massive. I'm on the like many girls that scream at Comic-Con. I'm not on that train. But I knew the trailers showed it, didn't it? That him in a corridor, I was like, you're going to get some form of one-man army thing. And what I loved is because it was something I didn't like in the book. This character, again, the door opens and this kind of dead body's plopped in. Bit of a waste. I understand why, but I was like, again, this will look amazing on film. And they didn't disappoint. The moment he seals the door, he does the salute, Hans Zimmer's bringing in like choir music. And I think at the point of his death, there's like two bodies in the room. Sorry, at the point of the start of the fight, there's the last Fremen and someone at the end. And when you get to his dead body, he has wiped out like at least all but 3 of an entire battalion. And it is just incredible seeing that fight. Because I think it's in an earlier sequence. Sorry, and I'm all over the place. I love him in this. He like yeets like a bullet out of his sort of
yes, it's in his shield, isn't it? Yeah, he does. Yeah,
like, he does. It's such an interesting way of having something like that. But his death scene's amazing. I think what sells it is when they're getting the laser through the door, and then it sort of slices, and he rises from the dead. The cinematography, he fucking pulls the sword out of himself, and again, for someone that isn't on the Momoa hype train, I now feel like I've become a part of the Momoa hype train because that was just an incredible sequence. And again, you can tell they've really improved the Paul and Duncan relationship in film, rather than saying they've got one, they show it, and just that whole sequence to me is just beautiful.
We might have another plot hole right here. Janice says, or Yanis, sorry. Lady Jessica could have used her voice to save him. Can you use the voice on multiple people at the same time? Or does it have to be sort of like one person that you command at a time?
I think it's targeted at one, but I don't think you could have done it through a wall. That's why.
Because like with Jedi mind tricks, we don't see, Luke walk into a room and just wave at everyone in the room and Jedi mind trick everyone, right? So I don't know if it's got a limited range or one-on-one, or if it takes too much mental strength, the more people that you try
I think it's more one-on-one because you're directing someone to do something, but I don't think Jessica could have saved him. I just think he knew the moment that door shut. Because at the start of the scene, he takes like a look around the room. Because obviously Paul said he saw his dead body in the corridor, didn't he?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think he even knew at that point in time. But that scene was we get like Fremen like spitting to make water, and like it's just really interesting seeing them sort of in their water, and that's how they drink. They have to like obviously recycle the moisture. So all that kind of guerrilla stuff I loved, but Yeah,
It's a cool
Duncan
scene.
Idaho's death.
I like the laser
Also,
cannon as well. It reminded me of like close the blast doors. That will hold them. And like Qui-Gon with a lightsaber coming through. I don't know. Maybe
is
that
it
was
the
just
only
me.
laser that actually goes all the way through and past the door?
Yeah, and it's
Like, how
like
often do you get that?
it's gonna like slice them in half if it like keeps going towards the left. Yeah, that was cool, that thing. Yeah, it's a good scene, you know, it's a good action moment, it's a good redemption for the character. And again, that's for the sake of adaptation. There's things that work better in the book than in the film, and you've kind of told me, you haven't told me like an extensive amount about the book, but you told me about that scene that it's just, oh, they found him slumped against the door, and we don't really get to see any kind of action scene or anything like that. That's not filmic. You absolutely do need to deliver, and especially if you've got Jason Momoa in the film, you need to give him like a proper send off. We've kind of talked about the director already, so you know we'll probably talk about Villeneuve at the end and everything. But as you mentioned, I don't think you could have asked for a better director at the moment to direct this thing. Proven track record with sci-fi, and you know, with Blade Runner 2049 as well, which is a film that I really need to give a second watch because I've still only seen it the once, and I think I need to go back to that one. Let's talk about your favorite guy. Let's talk about Hans Zimmer. The through line of this film, because you know a film's is only as good as its music as well. I think the soundtrack to this film is functional. I don't know if it's something that I would listen to on its own. And having seen Hans Zimmer do the music for, you know, No Time to Die, which is a soundtrack that I absolutely love, and a soundtrack that I have listened to on its own, it's very melodic. This one felt, I love that he sort of like, in his score, he appropriates the different cultures in a very similar way that you could argue Howard Shore did with the Lord of the Rings, that there are certain sounds, whether it be sort of like that Mongolian throat singing is the only way I can describe it for the villains. You've got almost like Middle Eastern chanting, like for the Bene Gesserit and the people on Arrakis, which I really enjoyed.
Electro soundtrack.
Yes, exactly. There's moments that do kind of sound like The Dark Knight again a little bit, so an electro soundtrack. So it's definitely distinctly Hans Zimmer. There's one scene where I did think the soundtrack was a little bit too much, and that's where you've got it was on Caladan, it's when the craft's rising out of the water. And I thought this should be like a nice, tender, nice little bit of music, because he's kind of, you know, this is the last time that I'm going to be on my planet going somewhere new. And Hans Zimmer's like, it was like this thing's emerging out of the water. I did think that was a little bit too much, but I think that the soundtrack is functional. It fits the film, it fits the mood and the environment, but it's not as melodic as I perhaps thought it would be. There is kind of a Dune main theme. You hear it at the very end of, I think it was trailer 2, this sort of vocalized, this female vocal. I don't really know how to describe it really. Basically, Wonder Woman's theme from Zack Snyder cut of Justice League. Every time Wonder Woman's on screen, you get that like vocal. It's basically that's the main theme. So I don't know. It's a very different soundtrack from the 84 one. Of course it is, because, you know, we've had pretty much 40 years since that one. And actually Toto, the ones who did the song Africa that you might have heard, they did the soundtrack to, it's like Queen doing the soundtrack to Flash Gordon. They pretty much did the soundtrack to Dune, and it really works. That feels more of a fantasy, whimsical feel to it, which is actually a soundtrack that I absolutely love. I think the music's incredible to the 84 one. This is very different, and it fits the tone of this film, but I don't know if it's necessarily a soundtrack that's, again, hummable, memorable in the grand scheme of things, but it does sort of work as that pulse. It's like his Dunkirk soundtrack, you know, works fantastically for the film. It's not necessarily a soundtrack that I go out of my way to listen to. You know, it's not exactly a foot tapper. Go on.
You know, I've waited a long time for this score.
Yeah. Hans Zimmer's waited a long time to do this score.
Yes, and I think it's worth going all the way back to 2019 when the news emerged that Hans Zimmer would not be composing the new Christopher Nolan film, and I was like, you know, what in the devil's name is this? What's gone on here? And it was as simple as this. I had to pick Dune or Tenet. And the day he said, and this isn't a criticism of the film at all, obviously he's my favorite composer. The best marketing I had was my favorite composer declined working with Christopher Nolan to do Dune. I was like, that means something big. Like, to me, that was, if he is choosing not to do it for Nolan, then there's a reason why. And he spoke, I know, at length over the years, saying, you know, it was his favorite book growing up. He'd had discussions with Denis Villeneuve on Blade Runner, saying that he kept egging Denis Villeneuve to do Dune, and that if he ever did Dune, he'd have to get Zimmer in for it. He'd drop everything to do it, and he literally did. And obviously, he didn't take any films until he finished the soundtrack. So when he came on last minute, shockingly for Bond, which we spoke about in our Bond video, I said I didn't expect it to be as good as it was, only for the fact that Hans Zimmer had came on so late on the game months before, and then obviously he did Wonder Woman, which was I don't think one of his best work, was a similar thing. He came on after Dune. He'd done Dune, he'd done Bond, and he just came in at the last minute, and that wasn't a good soundtrack. And I'll say that as a massive fan. I don't even know. I don't want to spend too long on this, but to me, this is first. It doesn't sound like anything he's done before. I think if you were to put all his soundtracks on in a row, this is going to probably stand out alongside with Batman Begins, Lion King, and Gladiator. I would say as maybe
there's bits of Gladiator in there for sure. Like there's bits of like I could imagine Commodus having like an evil monologue where you've got that ethereal. I think it's called not the prophecy. Oh god, the reprimand, is that what it's called on the Gladiator soundtrack? I can't remember. It's basically Commodus's theme, this very mysterious, exotic sounding one. If you've seen Gladiator, if you've heard the soundtrack, you probably know the one I mean. There's elements of it in there. I could hear that for sure.
But it doesn't
maybe the female vocal. I'm thinking of like Lisa Gerrard as well, kind of vibes too a little bit.
This was tribal, and this thing when I was listening to it, and the opening of the film,
the drums, yeah,
and even before that with the there's like a voice type thing. It's like, is this the Mongolian chant, or it was like Dreams? Something.
It's like a didgeridoo, isn't it? Almost how it sounds.
And it's really quick, and then you get the Warner Brothers logo, which is really cool. But I think to me, he's got the Oscar, please. He's only won one. He needs another. He deserves another, and there's just nothing like this one for me. When I spoke about Oscar Isaac's death, they have the vocalist as the gas is going out the room, building in sync with it, getting all this stuff. The Fremen have their own kind of way. The worm things. The score I've been listening to so much, and I need to also add, he's released 3 soundtracks for this film. He has released the normal one, which is an hour and 20. He's released the sketchbook, which is essentially conceptual suites, which is actually really interesting. It's about 9 songs, but it's about 2 hours, like 20-minute suites each. Some really good stuff, like the Benny Gesserit. You can see where all the ideas come from. And he's released a new one on Friday, which is for you to listen to whilst reading the Making of Dune book, which I've never seen a soundtrack ever released to go hand in hand with reading a book, let alone a making of book.
Making of, yeah.
So I think you could probably listen to us reading the book in truth, but to me, I think this was well worth the wait for me. And also, I think I don't know if we spoke previously. I mentioned Dunkirk. Some people said they really appreciate it in the film. I think Jed mentioned it to me. He think it works in the film, but he wasn't a fan of it. And I understand that's a few people say, but I think to me, this is it's designed for that film experience. That when I came out, the first thing I said was that I feel like his impact on this, like it is a character within that world, in the same way that John Williams' music is a character in Star Wars. That not just the integral points of it, but if you shut your eyes and watched every Star Wars film just by soundtrack, you'd know what planet you're on. You know where you are because of what the soundtrack's doing. Now, I don't know Lord of the Rings as well, so I can't jump it in that frame just because I'm not as familiar with it. But there are certain key points of Lord of the Rings where I know I'm in. They're not cities.
Dun, 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 dun. I know you love that one.
Like,
the
Uruk-hai. I'm in the Shire. The elf place. I'm just going to leave it there before you get angry. But it's the soundtrack needs to be when you're in another world. The soundtrack needs to be an identity rather than I feel like I've listened to this before elsewhere. I never had that with Dune. And, what really shocked me, I don't mind saying this in the stream, is that I was bursting for a piss on the Monday screening. I never need the Lou during a film. I'm genuinely convinced it's because of how loud the music is. And again, in the IMAX today, the whole thing is shaking as the music's going in. And I'm just sort of sat there like, is it the vibrations from the whole cinema shaking? And, you do the walk past the cinema when the film's done, and you can sometimes hear the rooms, what's being played. And I could just hear Dune in another room. I was like, yeah, this is Zimmer. But for me, the soundtrack, I managed to pre-order the Mondo Sketchbook one, which isn't even come out until February in anime 2000. But I've been on this, and since this film has come out, we've also rebooked Hans Zimmer tickets for next year. So all I'm going to say is it's been a lovely 2 weeks to be a Hans Zimmer fan. Because again, that Bond soundtrack, I didn't expect to be as good as it was. I thought it'd be 100% generic, but he had enough of his stamp. And I'm just sort of sat saying, we know that Ludwig Göransson's been announced for the Oppenheimer film. Sorry,
Oppenheimer, yeah.
And I know why, because Super Hands is doing part 2 of Dune. And I'm sat thinking, what the hell is he going to do next? When we get new characters or if characters appear, and what's he going to be able to bring into it? So for me, the soundtrack almost was more important to me than everything by Denis Villeneuve. I think once you get in the same way, John, if you look at Star Wars, you get Lucas, then you get Williams, then to me you got the actors, and I think Dune, I felt I'm in the similar path.
I think the way that the last sort of thing I'd say on the soundtrack for me is that, you mentioned like the Lord of the Rings thing, how you hear a piece of music, an orchestration, certain instruments that use or vocals, and you assign it to a place, a weapon, a character, whatever it happens to be, leitmotif. I feel like you can identify which place it is in Dune, which kind of group of characters, but it's low on the melody, like the leitmotif, like Star Wars, hummable. You've got Princess Leia theme, Imperial. Yeah. You've got all these themes that you can hum, that you can sing, that are instantly identifiable. I don't think you've really got that with Dune. You hear that low throat singing, it's like, oh, okay, I know whereabouts we are, but it's not really musical in terms of melodic and hummable, or bagpipes. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where I come down on it. I hope in part 2 we get a few more themes that come through that are sort of like instantly recognizable. We'll have to wait and see. It feels like he's cheating on Christopher Nolan, though. I don't like it. I'd be mad about it, but we are getting quality soundtracks from Ludwig Göransson, though, and I can't imagine anyone doing. The Tenet soundtrack's brilliant for that film, and if we had Zimmer, we probably wouldn't have had that.
And I kind of thought this when they announced Göransson for the next one. I was like, well, a part of me is kind of broken, but the other part of me is like, Ludwig Göransson, you do deserve to come back and have another go. Mm-hmm. But when this affair with Dune is over, please be Zimmer. Like, I'd be heartbroken.
I feel bad for Ludwig Göransson.
I know.
I mean, he's fine. He's got loads of projects lined up, but it's like, he's found his new home now.
They're like, I've always had a top 3 composers, haven't I? I've always called it the 3, Williams, Giacchino, and Zimmer. And I think I said Mandarin last year or Tenet. I was like, to me, Göransson is now is a top 4 now for me. It's like either one of them two doing anything, I don't care. But it's just that romantic in me, the Zimmer.
How about a collaboration? Let's meet in the middle. Zimmer and Göransson on a project. Is that too many cooks in the kitchen? Maybe is that a little bit?
I'd like to be in the recording room just to hear the noises.
You just got Ludwig Göransson high on weed and Zimmer just having none of it.
I mean, I have seen.
Well, maybe he does.
So I get to add that now, but I have seen him drunk. But it's the soundtrack's a big thing, and I think, as you said, I think it's got its own stamp on it. That I think there'd be nothing more depressing if we'd have watched this film and all this years of his soundtrack hype, it would have sounded exactly like some of his other work, which he has done in the past, which I don't hide from. But I'm glad it just didn't feel like I've heard any composer like it. I don't think any other composer could have done Dune, and I'm willing to put that on record. Even John Williams in his prime, the brass instruments just wouldn't have worked on something like this. Something like raw as a desert, you needed some kind of madness, and he did it all right.
Mm-hmm. I guess we're coming up to like a time, but I guess we can sort of say like final thoughts on this film, whether we think it's going to have any Oscar hype. When we roll around to Oscars. I can see this taking technicals, absolutely. I don't know if it will get like best visual effects or whatnot. I imagine it could do, but definitely for sound, I think it's definitely a strong contender. I'd like to see it be nominated for costumes. This is a costume movie, absolutely. When you've got that, what do you call it? Like the spaceship thing, the landing thing comes down at the
opening,
and you've got these ridiculous costumes that look great. They'd look silly in anything else. They're kind of like fresh out of Doctor Who or something. These face masks, and they've got staffs and robes, but they look fantastic, and it just adds to that, that sense of world building and everything like that. So I think he's got a shot at Best Director. I don't know if he'd necessarily win, but I'd like to see him get nominated for it. I think this is going to be nominated for a lot, but I think it's going to win a select few, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's deserving in all those categories, absolutely, at the moment, I think. If I'm going to give my final thoughts, I've seen this film 2 times now. I've definitely enjoyed it a lot more second time around than I initially did when I first watched it. I still think that, and maybe this is just the tone of Dune, but I do think that it is very dour and it's very stoic in a lot of responses, and a lot of the characters kind of do feel a little bit, do I say miserable? I mean, they're in a miserable planet, aren't they? Let's be fair. It's just a desert, barren, horrible wasteland kind of thing. So a lot of the characters felt like that, and I felt like it could have done with a bit more oomph in some of the characters, and I think that might turn a lot of people off to it because it is a slow burn film, and you haven't got many of these larger than life characters in the film. They're all kind of like, if you asked me to tell you Dr. Yui's personality, I wouldn't be able to tell you because he's just, kind of flatline character for me. But where this film really excels is the technicals, is the world building, the direction, cinematography, everything. This is a film that you absolutely have to see on the biggest screen possible. It's the best looking film I've seen. And, watching this film on the biggest screen that I could at the time, I was just there like, this is why we go to films. This is why the cinema experience is so important. And I had that. It is an epic, bringing it full circle to what you mentioned at the beginning. I did get that epic quality from it, as I genuinely haven't seen anything like this. There's the models, the CGI, everything just looked fantastic. So definitely, in terms of a fully visually realized world, this is absolute full marks for me. There is the argument of that, well, it's a part one, it does kind of cut off, things don't come to full fruition, and you don't really get a sense of finality or conclusiveness or a climax really in this film, not to the degree that you would expect. But I'm just really hoping we get that part two, and I'm pretty confident we will. And then seeing these two halves together as one entity, as one giant 5-hour film, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have a very different opinion on it, seeing it all complete together. But I'm going to have to wait a few years for that one, I think. But it's definitely a grower for me, I think, this one. But I do think, I still stand by, I think it's a very acquired taste film. And if someone, as the original Blade Runner film is, if someone watched Blade Runner and said, this is the most boring, crappy, mundane film, I've never been so bored in all my life film, I'd be like, I completely understand. But if someone says it's one of the best sci-fi films ever made, I'm in that camp with them. I think this is going to be similar to that regard, but I do think it is going to please the book fans for sure.
Yeah, I'm just quick for give fans. I'm with you on the Oscar stuff. I'm going to make a comparison to another one, Lord of the Rings. I think we're going to get similar territory. I think that I was doing a bit of research. Fellowship was nominated for like 10, 11 and won 3. And then obviously by the time you get to Return of the King, it's
clean sweep.
I don't mean this is like a discredit to the film, but it is very much it's a very good film. It is a clean sweep, but it is more so for the mission
Complete.
confirmed.
Yeah, exactly.
It's you've done the third one. We're not going to give it to you all on part one. We're going to wait till it's done. I think Dune's going to be very similar. I think this is probably the best director film of the year, but I don't think he'll win best director next year.
Yeah,
I think Denis Villeneuve will get best director for Dune Part 2. It will be the pat on the back. I don't think this will win best film. It will be, again, Dune Part 2. So I think we're going to get a lot of nominations, maybe 10 off the top of my head. And I think right now, the only thing I can see this winning is cinematography.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, God, cinematography. It's this versus Macbeth. That's a very interesting fight for March next year.
Oh, I still need to see that. Looking forward to that.
Cinematography, it can be right up there. It's got to take soundtrack for me. I'll actually... I will fly to America and find out who didn't vote for it if that's the case. It's going to be soundtrack, visual effects, again, technical stuff, stuff like sound. I think it's going to have a really, really strong Oscar year, but I think it is going to be that patient because we all know with the Oscars as well. Yes, very, very good films do get nominated and win stuff, but we also know the Oscars is almost as much down to marketing now as it is the actual film. So I think it's going to have a solid year, and then Dune Part 2 is going to be the creme de la creme for it. And I hope, without getting carried away for Part 2, it might be adapted wrong, who knows? But, if they can somehow do Part 2, then that's just an extraordinary achievement, just how mental that last part of the book is. You people know what I mean about the shit they've got to try and put on the big screen. But, so to me, final marks, talking about Dune Part 1 and not Oscars, this is without a doubt not just the best film of this year for me so far. This is one of the best film I've seen in many years. And I'm not going to sit here and start recounting the last sort of 5-6 years of cinema, but this was an experience like no other. And I think experience is a key word here, that I feel like I spent 3 hours in another world. I don't feel like they're very often at the cinema. Even with stuff like Star Wars, I'm sort of taken in like Star Wars. This was, I'm in Arrakis, I'm in Caladan, I'm with these people on a journey. And I've just not had that experience before, maybe since Mad Max, something that extreme. And I just think this was a beautiful film, so well adapted, and I'm glad that been able to read the book, and I'd consider myself a fan now. I want to read more of them, learn more, because it's just fascinating. As someone that's always been into sci-fi, it's nice to get some old school sci-fi in modern day cinema. Yes, I love my shoot them ups and all that stuff and fighting and stuff, but the old slow burn is an art that's been lost, and companies won't invest in them. And I think hopefully this might be a leaping point for some. So, Dune Part 1, I'm going to keep calling it. I hate the word magnum opus. I'm not going to say magnum opus yet. Other people are. I'm just going to say I think this is Denis Villeneuve's best film so far, and I think once we get Part 2, that might solidify Dune as an event within.
He'll have a complete entity. Yeah, maybe at that point after Part 2's done magnum opus.
That's what I feel like as well.
Yeah,
I think you'll be able to look at it as he spent probably 6-7 years on these 2 films. That is the
passion project for a lot of people involved.
Yeah. It's like no one
bringing to the screen the unfilmable book, like Lord of the Rings did, was the unfilmable book.
Exactly.
And
no one says, "Oh, Peter Jackson did well with the Fellowship of the Ring." They say, "No, he did Lord of the Rings," and I want that to be the case. That no, Denis Villeneuve did Dune, not Dune Part 1. So, yeah, that's my final thoughts.
We'll get reading through all the books, George. You can be the official Dune guy on the channel. I can be the official Lord of the Rings guy. Together, we'll conquer all of the fantasy and sci-fi laws out there.
And Game of Thrones is dead. With all its spin-offs, no one cares, so it can leave the chat.
We'll probably be reviewing them, won't we? Let's be honest, with the greatest of enthusiasm. What I will say is, though, you still haven't seen the 84 movie. I would love to get you to watch that film, whether it be a watch-along, whether you watch it in your own time and we talk about it. I really want to, now that you've read the book, you've watched this film, I want to see how you think that chalks up. I mean, that could be recent. That could be in the next, well, I don't know. We're quite chock-a-block on the channel, aren't we? Which we're actually going to go into now. But before we do, I'm going to hand over to you guys. We've had some people commenting, so thank you very much for tuning in. We've seemed to, by the numbers at least, had consistent viewers throughout this whole thing. So thank you for sticking around for the 2 hours if you've been here since the beginning. Let us know what you think of Dune or Dune Part 1. What are we saying about spoilers? Are we keeping spoilers from the second part of the book to a minimum in the comments for this thing?
If you want to comment, please don't comment a book spoiler for Part 2, but comment any spoiler for Part 1. How do I keep this without spoiling anything? If you want to message us about something, go on our Twitter, DM me. That sounds really sad, doesn't it? Go on our Twitter account. It says ran by Chris. It's got my tag in it. Click on my tag and drop me a DM. If you want to speak about anything that's a Part 2 spoiler, drop it in there just to keep it safe for those that might not know of events. So we haven't discussed characters that could be cast. We've discussed other things, bar obviously the nephew we spoke about, but we want to try and keep it for people because some people won't be able to read the book. Not everybody reads the books for films. We know that. We both try and do that, and we've covered that for many things, but not everyone watching this will also be able to. So we've tried to keep this as spoiler-free past Dune Part 1 as possible, which I think we've done a good job of. So
yeah, no,
if you do want to get into that, that's the only safe way I can suggest it. I don't think there's any voice there.
No, I think that's fine. Message George. He knows his stuff on Dude.
I'll try. Yeah, I don't know all of it, but I'll try.
And we've had a comment from Yanis again saying, thank you, enjoyed the show a lot. Thank you very much for tuning in, chipping in along the way. And we know it's going to probably be a few years off, but hope to see you on Part 2 where you can comment along with that as well. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Tomorrow, we're jumping back into Bond. We've done the retrospective. We've done the top 10. What's next? Well, I'll tell you what's next. We're pitching the next Bond film. So that's me and George on that one, and Tate will be joining us via video. This has been pre-recorded by this point, where we're each pitching our next Bond film. We're casting the next Bond, all the supporting characters, the villains, who's doing the Bond theme. If you've been following our content, it's going to be really, really fun because we're all in the same boat now. What's next for Bond? We'll find out tomorrow. That's at 8 p.m. British Standard Time. And of course, with the Bond stuff as well. Moving forward on Tuesday, we may have done all the Bond films, but have we really? We've got a couple of the outlier ones. So we will be reviewing Casino Royale. You might be saying we've already reviewed that. Yes, we have, but we haven't reviewed the 1967 one. So we've both never seen that film. We have no idea what to expect yet. And as of this recording, we both still haven't watched it. So I think we'll probably be watching that on Monday, and we'll be reviewing that on Tuesday at exactly the same time as well, 8 p.m. I think that's it for now, but we've had a lot of sort of comparisons in this review to Lord of the Rings and sort of like Peter Jackson and his directing. Stick around on the channel. Hit us up on our social medias. We might have some more information for you coming out next week. So once again, socials along the bottom of the screen right there. That's Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook.com/cinemasavvy, and exactly the same for letterboxd.com as well. I think that's everything. So once again, a big thank you to everyone that's tuned in, and we'll see you guys on the next video. Take care, everyone.